Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. I still remember the moment when the silence around me stopped being peaceful and started feeling like something else entirely. Heavy, watchful, like an unseen presence was pressing against my skin. I was parked deep in Grand Teton Campground inside Grand Teton National Park, surrounded by towering evergreens and the jagged peaks of the Tetons cutting sharp lines against the fading daylight. That evening, the forest was supposed to be a refuge, the kind of wilderness escape I had chased for years on the road. But as the sun slipped behind those mountains, the air grew colder, darker, and something inside me shifted. The day had begun with all the familiar comforts: the sun warming my face, the scent of pine needles underfoot, and the distant murmur of a mountain stream. I rolled in late afternoon, the tires crunching over gravel and dirt roads snaking through thick woods. I pulled into a spot tucked between two massive spruces, their trunks rough and knotted like ancient sentinels guarding secrets. Setting up my RV felt routine, the same motions I'd repeated hundreds of times on other trips. But here in this particular place, something didn't feel right. It was subtle, like a whisper under the hum of nature. Nearby, a group of locals gathered around a campfire, their voices low and serious. I caught pieces of their conversation as I passed. Words like respect, old spirits, and danger floated in the smoky air. One man, Jack, stood out. He was older, his skin weathered and sunburned, with eyes that seemed to hold stories I wasn't ready to hear. "This place is different," he told me later when I sat by his fire. "It's not just trees and rocks. Something's been here long before us. Something that watches. You gotta respect it, or it'll consume you." I smiled, nodding politely, but keeping my distance. I've heard warnings like that before. I've laughed them off, told myself the wilderness was wild, but manageable. That night, as the last light faded, I wished I had listened more closely. The air shifted as darkness swallowed the sky. The comforting scent of pine and fresh earth faded, replaced by something sour and metallic, like burnt copper mixed with rotting leaves. It slithered into my nose, clinging unpleasantly. Wrapped in a thick fleece, I stepped outside the RV and stared into the fire's flickering glow. The forest around me seemed still, almost unnervingly so. No rustling animals, no hooting owls, just a thick silence that felt alive. Then I heard it, a sharp, harsh cry cutting through the quiet, a raven calling somewhere deep in the woods. But it wasn't just one call, it repeated, measured and deliberate. Caw, caw. The rhythm was unsettling, unnatural. I scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, but all I could see were black silhouettes and the shifting of branches in the breeze. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a sensation I couldn't explain. The silence was shattered again, this time by a slow, deliberate knocking on the side of the RV. My heart jumped. I threw open the door, breath visible in the cold night air, but saw nothing. Just the forest, still and dark. The knocking came again, softer this time, then paused as if waiting for me to respond. Every time I opened the door, there was no one, no sign of life, only the oppressive quiet and the strange smell curling around me. I told myself it was probably a branch, or maybe a curious raccoon, but the sound persisted, steady and persistent, tapping against the metal side like a warning. The sense of being watched grew heavier, the shadows seeming to pulse and twist with something alive and hungry. Sleep was impossible that first night. My mind raced between denial and fear. I told myself I was just tired, imagining things after a long day's drive. But deep down, my instincts screamed that something was wrong, that forest wasn't just trees and animals, it was something else. Something old, patient, and hungry. I lay awake, the knocking still echoing faintly against the metal walls, the raven's calls circling endlessly outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a slowly closing noose of silence and shadows, the wild pressing closer with every breath I took. Morning brought a brittle chill that didn't quite lift, even when the sun peeked shyly over the jagged peaks. The campgrounds stirred with the slow routines of campers breaking their fast, voices low and cautious. I brewed coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the uneasy knot tightening in my gut. I wanted to shake off the night's terror, chalk it up to exhaustion and imagination. But the sour metallic smell lingered in the air, stubborn and sharp. That's when I met Sarah and Tom, a couple setting up their small tent just a few campsites down. They looked drawn and pale, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. We exchanged greetings, and before long I found myself listening as they told their story. A story not unlike mine, but with details that gnawed at the edges of my disbelief. They'd arrived a few days before me, excited for the trip they'd planned for months. But from the first night, strange things had happened. Footsteps circling their tent, soft and deliberate, pacing slow and uneven, like something big trying to stay quiet but failing. Sometimes the footsteps paused, then resumed, never moving away. They'd spotted footprints in the soft earth, prints that defied explanation. Too large for any deer or elk, and yet not human either. The toes were twisted and elongated, claws digging into the dirt in impossible angles. Sarah showed me a photo she'd snapped before they covered the tracks. Even seeing it on my phone, I felt a shudder creep up my spine. "Did you hear the knocking too?" Tom asked, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. All night long. Their story confirmed what I was starting to accept. This wasn't just a campground. It was a threshold, a place where the forest's shadows bled into something darker and more dangerous. Sarah and Tom spoke of the growing sense of being watched, of sounds that didn't belong, low growls that faded before they could be pinpointed, whispers riding the wind but never quite making words. That afternoon, the air seemed to thicken. The pine scent was suffocating, cloying, layered now with the tang of damp earth and decay. The sun filtered through the trees in sickly shafts of light, turning the forest floor into a patchwork of deep shadows and blinding glare. I decided to take a walk, hoping to shake the rising panic. The forest loomed around me, a cathedral of green and brown, the trunks gnarled like the hands of giants. Each step on the soft earth felt heavier, as if the forest were pushing back against me. Then I heard it, the scratching. A slow, deliberate rasping sound coming from just beyond a thicket of bushes. It was too rhythmic to be an animal, too precise to be wind. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as I froze, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving a silence so thick it felt like the world held its breath. I stood motionless, eyes straining in the dim light, waiting for something, anything, to move, but nothing did. When I returned to camp, my skin prickled with cold sweat despite the mild afternoon. Sarah and Tom were packing, their faces pale but resolute. "We can't stay here another night," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever this place is, it's not just in our heads. We have to leave before it gets worse." Their fear mirrored my own. We shared a look, the kind that says, sometimes survival means knowing when to run. That evening, the sun sank behind the Tetons with an angry red glow, as if the mountains themselves were warning us. The sour metallic smell returned, thickening with the cold. The knocking resumed, now urgent, relentless, pounding like a drumbeat on the RV's side. I sat rigid, clutching a flashlight, willing myself not to look outside. The forest around me seemed to lean closer, the shadows growing teeth and claws, ready to pounce. The raven's call circled overhead, its cadence maddeningly deliberate, like a warning repeated too many times. Then I caught a glimpse, just a flicker, of tall, thin shapes moving between the trees. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, like long fingers brushing the trunks with slow, deliberate motions. Their eyes glowed faintly, twin pinpricks of pale light that pierced the darkness. My breath caught, panic rising in my chest like a tidal wave. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen, caught between fear and disbelief. The knocking turned to pounding, fierce and angry, as if whatever waited in the woods was demanding I leave. Or worse. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and anything I could use as a weapon. Heart hammering, I threw open the door and sprinted for the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the fog, rolling over the mountains. The forest shapes didn't vanish. They stalked just beyond the beams, shadows growing and twisting. I didn't look back as I tore down the winding road, the screams of the raven echoing in my ears, a terrible chorus chasing me out of that place. The road blurred beneath me as I drove faster, the dark forest shrinking behind in angry shadows. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly I thought my knuckles would crack. The cold sweat on my skin mingled with tears I refused to let fall. Somewhere inside, a voice screamed to stop, to turn back, to face what was hunting me. But I silenced it. Survival wasn't about courage in that moment, it was about running, pure and simple. The air inside the RV felt thick, stifling. The metallic smell clung to my clothes, my skin, a reminder of how close I'd come to something I couldn't explain or fight. My phone's battery was dying, and I had no signal, no way to call for help, just the relentless echo of the raven's cry chasing me down the mountain roads. I pulled into the nearest ranger station as fast as I dared, the headlights catching the weary faces of park rangers on evening shift. Their questions came fast, my broken words tumbling out in panic and disbelief. They'd heard rumors, they said, stories older than the park itself. Stories of forest spirits, of strange shapes glimpsed at twilight, of campers who vanished without a trace. They called it the Shadow Watcher, a name whispered in dread and warning. That night, in the safe light of the station, I finally let my walls crumble. I spoke with Sarah and Tom on the phone, both shaken but grateful to be far from the forest's grasp. We shared pieces of the terror, each detail matching the others like parts of a puzzle no one wanted to solve. What I learned, painfully, was that this place was a boundary, not just between wilderness and civilization, but between what we know and what we fear to understand. The forest here wasn't neutral. It was alive with something ancient and angry, something that tested the limits of human courage and sanity. The days after, as I drove away from Grand Teton, the mountains receding in my rearview mirror, I felt the weight of that place settle into my bones. It wasn't just fear I carried. It was a lesson, brutal, raw, and real. To respect the wilderness means more than packing the right gear or following the rules. It means listening to the silence when it grows too loud, trusting the instincts that tell you to leave, and understanding that some places hold secrets best left alone. Even now, months later, when the forest is quiet and the night still, I hear the raven's call echoing in my mind. It's a reminder, a warning etched deep in my memory that out there, beyond the comfort of lights and roads, something watches, something waits, and sometimes it lets you leave, but never without marking you. My name is Quincy Lopez, and I'm 31 years old. This happened last fall at Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia. I had just finalized my divorce, packed up my life, and hit the road in an RV that still smelled like the dealership. I told myself this trip was about reconnecting with nature, about finding some clarity, but really I was running from guilt, loneliness, and the wreckage of a life I'd built and then broken. I chose Spruce Knob because it was isolated, and isolation was exactly what I thought I needed. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know about the Devil's Rock. If I had, I'd like to think I would have turned back, but honestly, I don't know if I could have resisted. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun slipping behind the ridge as I parked my RV at a campsite near the summit. The forest here was dense, the spruce trees standing like sentinels in the fading light. I set up a small fire and sat by it, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. That's when I met Eli. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged in the mountains, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered like an old oak tree. I'd stopped by the trailhead earlier to get a map, and he must have noticed the out-of-state plates on my RV because he wandered over to introduce himself. "You're new around here," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Just passing through," I replied. We talked for a while, mostly about the trails and the weather. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Eli asked, "You hear about the Devil's Rock yet?" I shook my head, curious despite myself. "It's an old legend," he said, leaning against a tree. "There's a boulder deep in the woods, smooth as glass, they say. Folks claim if you touch it, you can make a wish, but it always comes at a price." I laughed nervously. "And what's the price?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Depends. Sometimes it's your sanity, sometimes it's worse." I tried to brush it off as campfire talk, but his tone stayed with me long after he walked away. The first night was uneventful, but strange things started happening the next day. I set out on one of the trails Eli had recommended, hoping to clear my head and maybe snap a few photos. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. That's when I noticed the trail veering off to the right, unmarked and overgrown. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. The path twisted through the trees, narrowing until I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive boulder, smooth and black, its surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Dead trees surrounded it, their branches bare and skeletal. I didn't stay long. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl. That night, the tapping started. I was lying in bed half asleep when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded like someone or something was knocking. But when I finally mustered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The next morning, I found small handprints in the dirt outside the RV. They were faint but unmistakable, as if left by a child. I shook it off as my imagination, but later that day, I saw her. She was standing just off the trail, a teenage girl with pale skin and long dark hair. She wore a tattered dress that looked like something out of a history book, and her eyes were wide and pleading. "Are you lost?" I called out. She nodded but didn't speak. I stepped toward her, but before I could get close, she turned and darted into the woods. I chased after her, shouting for her to wait, but she disappeared, leaving no trace but a trail of faint footprints leading toward the clearing. When I returned to the RV, the unease I'd been feeling turned into something darker. I couldn't shake the girl's image from my mind, her hollow eyes and the way she seemed to vanish into thin air. That night, I dreamed about the Devil's Rock. In the dream, the girl was sitting on the boulder, her hands resting on its smooth surface. Her voice was soft but insistent. "It can give you what you want." When I woke, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next morning, I decided to find the boulder again. I don't know what I was expecting. Answers, maybe, or closure. The unmarked trail was easier to find this time, as if it had been waiting for me. The clearing was just as I remembered it, the boulder looming in the center like some ancient monolith. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she appeared. The girl stood on the far side of the boulder, her expression vacant. She raised a hand, motioning for me to come closer. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the boulder and whispered, "It can give you what you want." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The memory of my family, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my ex-wife's smile flooded my mind. I hadn't seen them in months, and the thought of a second chance was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched the rock. At first, nothing happened. I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingers, but that was all. Disappointed, I returned to the RV, trying to convince myself it had been a foolish impulse. But that evening, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should talk." The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. I thought the rock had worked, that I'd been given a miracle. But the miracle came with a price. That night, the girl returned. She appeared outside the RV, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the room. "You made your wish," she whispered. "Now it's time to pay." The lights in the RV flickered, and the shadows inside began to twist and rise. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled outside, shouting into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "It's not me. It's the rock." Desperate, I raced back to the clearing. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me as I ran. When I reached the boulder, it seemed larger, its surface pulsing like a living thing. The girl appeared again, her form shifting and flickering like a glitch in a video. "You can't undo it," she said, her voice echoing. "But you can stop it from taking more." I grabbed a hammer from my pack and swung it at the boulder. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the girl screamed, her voice merging with the sound of the rock cracking. The boulder split down the middle, a deafening roar echoing through the forest. The girl collapsed, her form dissolving into mist as the air grew still. When I woke the next morning, the clearing was empty. The boulder was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. I returned to the RV and called my ex-wife, apologizing for everything. Whatever chance we had at reconciliation, I knew it had to come from me, not from some cursed rock. As I drove away from Spruce Knob, I caught a glimpse of the girl in my rearview mirror, standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either. She was just watching. Sometimes the things we want most come at a price too steep to pay, and sometimes we have to let go to move forward. People say the Appalachian forests are haunted. I'd heard the rumors, whispers of restless spirits and strange disappearances, but I'd never given them much thought. After years of debunking ghost stories as a journalist, I became the kind of person who trusted facts, not folklore. Still, I couldn't resist the pull of Pisgah National Forest. It was remote, beautiful, and full of forgotten places that no one cared to visit anymore. Perfect for the series I'd been working on for my blog, Ghost Towns of the Forgotten South. This was my passion now, traveling, exploring the lost corners of America, and turning those empty spaces into stories. This time, I was after an old settlement deep in the forest, one that most people in town wouldn't even talk about. There were no records of why it had been abandoned, just strange rumors of sickness and disappearances, but those stories were always embellished over time. People loved their spooky tales, and it was my job to sift the truth from the legend. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near the trailhead, not far from the ghost town, or what remained of it. I planned to spend a couple of nights out here, explore, take some pictures, and maybe talk to a few locals who might know more about its history. The air was crisp and cool as I stepped outside. The towering trees cast long shadows, making it feel later than it was. As I set up camp, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the forest was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I brushed it off. Deep forests always had a strange stillness about them. I'd been in enough of them to know that the real danger was tripping over a root, not some ghostly figure hiding behind the trees. That first night, I woke to a distant sound, like laughter. It was faint, barely a whisper on the wind. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening. Could there be other campers out here? I doubted it. This part of the forest wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. My phone was dead, but I'd recorded some video earlier in the day. I grabbed my camera and replayed the footage. There it was, faint, like a breeze blowing through, but unmistakable, children's laughter. I pushed it out of my mind and went back to sleep. I had a lot of ground to cover tomorrow, and the last thing I needed was to let my imagination run wild. The next day, I set out to find the old settlement. It was slow going. Thick overgrowth and fading trails made navigation difficult. The map I had was basic, nothing more than a dotted line leading me deeper into the woods. The farther I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was closing in around me. But I kept going, determined to find this place. After about an hour, I noticed carvings, symbols, strange and jagged, etched into the bark of the trees. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized, but they gave me an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was some old superstition, a way to ward off bad spirits. I took a few photos and kept moving. It was another hour before I finally found it. The ghost town was just as eerie as I'd imagined. Small, dilapidated cabins stood in clusters, some half collapsed under the weight of time and nature. Weeds and vines crept over everything, reclaiming the land. I walked through the empty streets, my camera clicking as I captured the desolation, the eerie stillness. That's when I saw the cemetery. Small, tucked away behind what must have been the church, though the building itself was nothing more than a few rotting beams. The graves were old, the names barely legible, but the dates caught my eye. Some of them were from decades ago, but others were from the future. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake, some kind of misprint or vandalism, but the stones looked too old, too weathered to be recent. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back from the graves. It didn't make sense, and I didn't like the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I realized then that I hadn't heard anything. Not birds, not insects, nothing since I'd arrived. I packed up my camera and headed back toward my RV. I'd gotten what I came for, and figured I'd do some research on the strange gravestones when I got back to town. But something was wrong. The trail didn't look right. I was sure I'd come from this direction, but now the trees seemed different. The symbols I'd passed earlier weren't there anymore, and the forest seemed denser, more oppressive. My pulse quickened. I was lost. That was impossible. I never got lost, not with GPS and maps, not with all the preparation I'd done. I kept walking, trying to retrace my steps, but the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. Every turn led me to unfamiliar territory, and soon the forest looked completely foreign. My sense of time slipped away and the sky started to darken, even though it felt like midday. Then I saw it, just ahead through the trees. A figure stood on the trail, tall and motionless, watching me. I stopped cold, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting through the gloom, but as I did, it vanished. Just gone. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. My hands shook as I adjusted my pack. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. The sun had nearly set by the time I found my RV. It was parked where I left it, but somehow the journey back had taken hours longer than it should have. My legs were aching, my mind spinning with confusion. I climbed inside, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. That's when the laughter started again, louder this time, right outside the RV. I shot up, my heart pounding. I could hear them, children laughing and running around, their voices bouncing off the trees. I grabbed the camera, pointing it toward the window. But the moment I did, the laughter stopped. The forest was silent again, suffocating in its stillness. I played back the footage on the camera, hoping to catch something, anything, that would explain what was happening. But instead, I heard something else. A voice, clear as day, whispering my name. "Alex." I froze. The camera dropped from my hands and hit the floor with a thud, the sound echoing in the empty RV. Something was out there, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed, every muscle tense, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. I thought about leaving, driving out of the forest and abandoning the project altogether, but the RV wouldn't start. I tried the engine a dozen times, but it was dead as if the battery had drained overnight. My phone was useless, still dead from the day before. I was completely cut off. The next morning, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was out there watching me. I remembered the symbols on the trees, the strange carvings I'd seen on my hike. They had to mean something. Maybe they were the key to getting out of here. I grabbed my camping knife and headed back into the woods. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of dread. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep walking. I found the first symbol carved into the bark of a tree just off the trail. With a deep breath, I drove the blade into the wood, carving through the lines. As soon as the symbol was broken, the air shifted. The forest seemed to shudder, and for a moment I thought I heard a scream, a distant echo and wail carried on the wind. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but I kept going. I found the next tree and did the same, cutting through the strange lines with my knife. The voices grew louder, the laughter, the whispers, all swirling around me like a storm. I could see the figures now, darting between the trees, shadowy, faceless figures watching, waiting. They wanted me to stop. They didn't want me to leave. But I wasn't going to be trapped here, not like them. I reached the final tree, my hands trembling as I raised the knife. The voices were deafening now, the figures closing in, but I didn't stop. With one last slash, I broke the symbol, and just like that, the voices stopped. The forest went still. The shadows vanished, and the oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted. I stumbled back toward my RV, half expecting the figures to reappear, but the woods were empty. When I got back, the engine started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove out of the forest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I wasn't going to write about this place. I wasn't going to tell anyone what happened here. Some things are better left forgotten. My name is Alaric Shaw, and in 2010, I went camping in the Bitterroot National Forest, Montana. I figured it would be a peaceful getaway after getting out of a messy divorce and the corporate grind back in Salt Lake City. Now, let me be clear. I'm not one of those folks who pack up and run every time life kicks them in the teeth, but after all that drama, I needed a break. I bought a battered old RV, loaded up with canned beans, some cheap whiskey, and the dog-eared copy of Catch-22 my ex left behind. The spot I picked was way off the beaten path, almost a 2-hour drive from any semblance of civilization. The Bitterroots are beautiful in that rugged, untouched way, full of dense trees, streams with water so cold it knocked the wind out of you, and wildlife that wants nothing to do with you. My setup was simple. Park the RV in a clearing by the tree line, fire up a camp stove, and sink into the peace. Around dusk, I noticed a pickup truck far down the old logging road. Didn't think much of it at first. Locals sometimes camped here too, or maybe some other traveler was looking for a secluded spot. But the way that truck was sitting there, headlights off, engine running, had me curious. I strolled over, pretending to stretch my legs while sneaking glances at the truck. A man stepped out, maybe mid-40s, with a lean, wiry frame, like he could break in half but somehow looked tough enough to wrestle a bear. He was dressed in a stained jacket, ratty jeans, and had a face covered in scars that didn't seem like they were from shaving mishaps. Something about the way he stared, like he was sizing me up, made me uneasy. "Hey friend," he called out, voice gruff like gravel. "You alone out here?" Not exactly the question you want to hear in the middle of nowhere, but I kept it light, laughing it off like saying, "Yeah, just me and the stars." The guy grunted, nodded, then got back into his truck, never breaking eye contact until he shut the door. He didn't drive off immediately, just sat there idling, watching as I walked back to my RV. He finally pulled away after what felt like an eternity. Once he left, I brushed it off. He was probably just another local, maybe a little off, but harmless, right? I poured myself a drink and huddled by the fire, but even with the whiskey warming me up, I couldn't shake the prickling unease he left behind. The night rolled on with that thick, unnatural silence only deep woods have. I turned in around midnight, locking the RV door, a habit I usually skip out in the boonies. About an hour later, I jolted awake to the sound of something banging on metal. I blinked, still groggy, listening for it again. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock on the RV's side panel. Not random thumps, these knocks had a rhythm, like someone drumming fingers on a table. Figuring it might be some curious animal, I flicked on the flashlight and cracked open the door. The beam cut through the dark, landing on nothing but trees. No signs of life, no animals, no truck. I sighed, chalking it up to a raccoon or something messing around. But before I could close the door, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel, coming from the other side of the RV. I tensed, holding the flashlight like a club, and edged around the back, ready to scare off whatever was out there. The beam of light caught a figure crouched low near my fire pit, sifting through my stuff with quiet focus. "Hey!" I barked, my voice cracking louder than I wanted. "What are you doing?" The figure didn't budge for a second, then slowly rose to his feet, turning toward me with a grin I couldn't read in the dark. It was the guy from earlier, same greasy jacket, same twisted grin that stretched his scarred face in ways that seemed unnatural. "You left your stuff out?" he said, voice dripping with false friendliness. "Thought I'd keep it safe for you." Didn't need his help, and I told him that flat out, backing up toward the door. There was a coldness in his eyes, not anger, not the kind of bitterness that comes from life giving you a bad hand. This was something worse, something that didn't belong in those woods or anywhere else. "You know," he said, "I don't get many visitors around here. Folks tend to keep to themselves. But you seemed like the curious kind." My throat tightened. I kept backing up, watching his hands in case he tried something, though I wasn't sure what I'd do if he did. My flashlight wasn't exactly intimidating, and my only other weapon was a pocket knife buried somewhere in my bag inside. "Just passing through," I replied, keeping it casual, light. "No harm done, right?" He smiled. But it was all teeth, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I almost expected him to lunge at me, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, that eerie grin plastered on his face, as if he was waiting for something. I took another step back, then turned, heading for the RV door. But I barely got halfway when he called out. "You might want to leave now. Things get interesting around here after dark." He didn't say it with a hint of humor, didn't even try to make it sound friendly. It was a threat, plain and simple, the kind you don't misinterpret. I climbed into the RV, locked the door, and waited, watching through the small, fogged-up window as he vanished into the trees, his shadow melting away into the forest. Trying to sleep after that was a lost cause. I sat up, listening for any sounds that weren't the usual creaks and snaps of a forest night. Around 3 a.m, just as my nerves were starting to calm down, I heard a soft scraping against the side of the RV. The sound made my skin crawl. It was a slow, methodical scratching, like nails dragging down the metal frame. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to panic. But when the scratching moved to the window above my bed, something snapped in me. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it toward the sound, heart hammering in my chest. But when I flicked it on, the beam caught nothing, just my own tired, rattled face staring back at me in the reflection. I stayed up all night, waiting for the first hint of daylight. I don't know how I did it, but as soon as that sun broke the horizon, I was packed up and ready to hit the road. I fired up the RV, got the hell out of there without looking back. Figured I was in the clear. Maybe a little shaken, but no worse for wear. Just as I hit the main road out of the forest, I spotted the same pickup truck, parked on the shoulder, waiting. I glanced over, and sure enough, he was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me with that same twisted grin. It wasn't until I sped past, seeing him watch me in the rearview mirror, that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sticking out of the back of his truck were several large black trash bags, stuffed full and tied tight, with smears of something dark streaking down the sides. Sticking out from one of the bags, plain as day, was a human hand. I stared at that hand in the rearview mirror, my brain doing somersaults trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't possible, was it? I must have been exhausted, sleep-deprived, and shaken up by the night's events. My mind had to be playing tricks on me. But I knew what I saw, and it was real. Fingers pale, curled, sticking out of a trash bag like it was garbage. I punched the gas, speeding down that winding forest road, the RV groaning as it struggled to keep up with my panic. Heart racing, I looked for cell service, any signal to call for help, but of course, out here in the bitter roots there was nothing. Just me, the road, and that guy in his beat-up truck somewhere behind me. The dirt road twisted and turned, my RV rattling as I took each bend too fast, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever nightmare I just glimpsed. I chanced to look in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the pickup tearing down the road after me, but he was gone, nowhere in sight. I didn't stop driving until I hit a small town about an hour south, a place called Darby. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and stumbled out of the RV, my legs barely able to hold me up. The attendant, a young guy with a bored look, stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "Phone," I said, pointing to the counter, barely able to get the word out. "I need to use the phone, urgently." He nodded, probably thinking I was some crazed wilderness nut, but he handed me the phone anyway. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly I could hardly punch in the numbers. The dispatcher's voice crackled on the other end, calm and collected. I told them everything. The man, the truck, the trash bags, the hand. The dispatcher took my statement with the practiced calm of someone who'd heard it all before, but I could tell she knew this was something serious. She promised to send someone out to the area and asked me to stay put in case they had further questions. I sat on the curb outside the gas station, the morning sun creeping over the mountains, turning everything a gentle shade of orange. It felt surreal, like the events of the night hadn't actually happened. Like maybe I dreamed it all. But the sweat on my skin and the thundering of my heartbeat said otherwise. About an hour later, a sheriff's deputy arrived, a stocky guy named Officer Redford, who looked about as rugged as the mountains themselves. He took my statement, asking me to repeat every detail. I told him about the man's scars, his truck, the bags, the hand. Officer Redford's face hardened with each word, a shadow crossing his eyes. "You're not the first one to report something strange up there," he said, glancing back at his squad car. "We've had some missing persons cases recently, hikers mostly, and campers gone without a trace. Could be we finally got a lead." He asked me to wait in town, just in case. They were sending a search team up the road I'd come from, but I knew there was no way I was sticking around. The deputy didn't push, just handed me his card and told me to call if I remembered anything else. As I drove out of Darby, I couldn't shake the image of that man's grin and the way he'd stared at me like he knew something I didn't, like he'd planned all along to leave me rattled, afraid, running. I felt a chill, but not the kind you feel from fear. It was the cold grip of certainty, the kind that sinks in when you know you've just come face to face with something truly wrong. A week later, I got a call from Officer Redford. They'd found the truck abandoned up in the Bitterroot, doors open, trash bags scattered nearby, and in one of those bags, Along with the remains of 3 missing hikers, they found a journal, scraps mostly, with ramblings about cleansing the forest and keeping it pure. Some manifesto scribbled by a man who saw himself as a twisted guardian of the wilderness. They never found him. My name is Desmond Mason, and back in 2024, I took my RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. I've always been a sucker for the great outdoors. There's something about the crisp mountain air that makes you forget about emails and traffic jams. I arrived at the park on a Tuesday afternoon, eager to set up camp before sunset. The place was breathtaking, towering peaks capped with snow, pristine lakes reflecting the sky, and dense forests that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. I found a spot near Lake McDonald, not too close to other campers, but within a reasonable distance in case I needed a cup of sugar or someone to share a campfire story with. As I was setting up, a fellow camper wandered over. He was a tall, lanky guy with a beard that would make a lumberjack jealous. "Hey there, name's Bill," he said, extending a hand. "Desmond," I replied, shaking it firmly. "First time up here?" "Nah, I've been coming here for years. Best fishing spot this side of the Mississippi," he said with a grin. We chatted for a bit about the usual weather, the best trails to hike, and the ever-present possibility of bears rummaging through your food stash. "Just remember," Bill said, "the only thing more unpredictable than the wildlife up here is the weather. Keep an eye on the sky." "Will do," I assured him. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I cooked up some dinner. Nothing fancy, just beans and franks. Gourmet cooking was never my strong suit, but hey, everything tastes better when you're camping. I settled into a folding chair, watching the stars prick through the twilight. It was one of those nights where the sky looked like a spilled jar of glitter. I was just about to turn in when I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. Probably a raccoon or some other critter looking for scraps, I thought. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. Great. "Now I'm talking to squirrels," I muttered. I decided to ignore it and headed inside the RV. Just as I was locking up, I heard footsteps, definitely human footsteps, crunching on the gravel outside. I peered through the window but saw nothing. Maybe it was Bill playing a prank. I made a mental note to get back at him with a whoopee cushion under his sleeping bag. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to hit one of the trails Bill had recommended. As I was packing my backpack, I noticed something odd. A small carved wooden figure placed on the hood of my RV. It was crudely made, resembling a human but with exaggerated features. A long nose and hollow eyes. "Very funny, Bill," I said under my breath. I picked it up and looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. Shrugging it off, I tossed the figure into my backpack, thinking it might make for a good souvenir. I set out on the trail, the morning air cool and invigorating. The path wound through thick forests and opened up to stunning vistas of valleys below. About an hour in, I came across a clearing where I saw another camper. A woman this time, looking somewhat lost. "Hey there, you okay?" I called out. She turned abruptly, her face pale. Did you see anyone else around here?" she asked nervously. "Just you and the trees," I replied. "Why?" "I thought I was being followed," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," I offered. She didn't look convinced. "Maybe. I'm Karen, by the way." "Desmond, nice to meet you." We chatted for a bit, and I offered to walk with her until our paths diverged. Safety in numbers, right? As we walked, I tried to lighten the mood. If we get lost out here, at least we'll have a great story to tell. Provided we make it back, I joked. She cracked a smile. "Yeah, and if we don't, we at least make the evening news." "Local campers vanish in the woods. Film at 11, I quipped. We parted ways after a while, and I continued deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser and the canopy above thickened, allowing only slivers of sunlight to pierce through. I checked my map and compass to make sure I was still on the right path. That's when I heard it, a faint humming sound, almost like a chant. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. I moved cautiously, the humming growing louder as I approached a hidden clearing. Peering through the bushes, I saw a small group of people dressed in tattered clothes gathered around a fire. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, each holding a wooden figure similar to the one I found. Well, this just got interesting, I thought. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but as I zoomed in, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the circle was a body, motionless and covered in what looked like symbols drawn in red. "This isn't a knitting club," I whispered to myself as I tried to back away slowly. I stepped on a dry branch, the snap echoing like a gunshot. The chanting stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and bolted back the way I came. Behind me, I could hear footsteps and shouting. "Get him!" someone yelled. My heart pounded in my chest as I weaved through the trees, branches whipping against my face. I didn't dare look back. I could hear them gaining on me, their footsteps crunching leaves and snapping twigs. I spotted a fallen log ahead and had a split-second decision to make. I leaped over it, hoping they'd trip if they followed too closely. Luck was on my side. I heard a thud and a curse as at least one of them hit the ground. "Should have tied your shoelaces," I thought grimly. I kept running until I burst out onto a familiar trail. Relief washed over me as I recognized the path back to the campsite. But my relief was short-lived. Standing on the trail ahead was Bill. "Bill, we have to get out of here," I shouted. He looked at me with an odd expression. "Why the rush, Desmond?" "There's a group of people back there doing some kind of ritual. I think they killed someone." He tilted his head, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Oh, you weren't supposed to see that." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "You city folks never learn," he said, taking a step toward me. "Some things are better left alone." I took a step back. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going to leave." "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," he replied, pulling out a hunting knife. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I blurted out, my mouth moving faster than my brain. He chuckled. "Always appreciate a bit of humor before the hunt." I turned and ran. Down a side path, adrenaline fueling my legs, I ran. Behind me, Bill's footsteps were steady, unhurried. "You're only making this harder on yourself," he called out. I spotted Karen up ahead, frantically waving at me. "This way," she shouted. I didn't question it. I sprinted toward her, and we ducked behind a cluster of boulders. "What's going on?" I gasped. "I saw them too," she whispered. "They've been tracking campers and hikers, picking us off one by one." "Fantastic. And here I thought mosquitoes were the worst thing out here," I said. She gave a grim smile. "We need to get to the ranger station." "Agreed. Any idea which way that is?" "About 2 miles east, but we'll have to go off trail." "Lead the way." We moved quickly but cautiously, trying to stay hidden. The forest seemed more menacing now, every shadow a potential threat. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged near a dirt road. "Almost there," Karen said. Suddenly a truck roared up, cutting us off. 2 men jumped out, both holding rifles. "End of the line," one of them sneered. I raised my hands. "Look, we don't want any trouble." "Funny, neither do we," the other man said, cocking his rifle. Karen glanced at me, her eyes conveying a mix of fear and determination. "Got any more of those jokes?" she whispered. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" I muttered. Not helping. Just then, a siren blared in the distance. The men exchanged glances. "Rangers," one of them spat. "We'll deal with you later." They jumped back into the truck and sped off. "Saved by the bell," I sighed. A park ranger vehicle pulled up moments later. An older man with a stern face stepped out. "You folks okay?" he asked. "Never better," I replied. "Just out for a casual jog, being chased by lunatics." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to explain that?" We quickly recounted the events. The ranger's expression grew more serious. "We've had reports of missing campers in the area," he said. "Didn't think it was more than people getting lost." "Well, now you know," Karen said. He radioed for backup and instructed us to stay with him. Within half an hour, more rangers arrived along with local law enforcement. They organized a search party and escorted us back to the main campground. As we passed by Bill's campsite, it was completely cleared out, no sign he'd ever been there. "Looks like your friend packed up," the ranger noted. "Some friend," I muttered. Over the next few hours, we gave detailed statements. They asked if we could identify the men we saw. "One of them is named Bill," I said. "Tall, bearded, looks like he wrestles bears for fun." "Could be anyone up here." This, the officer replied. As the sun began to set, the authorities advised us to leave the park for our safety. Don't have to tell me twice, I said. Karen and I exchanged contact information. Maybe next time we'll choose a beach vacation, she suggested. Sandcastles over serial killers any day, I agreed. As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. But at least for now, I was getting the hell out of Dodge. A few days later, I did some digging online. Turns out there had been rumors about a group of poachers operating in the area, using the park's remoteness to their advantage. They weren't just hunting animals. They were trafficking illegal goods, and apparently they didn't like witnesses. The leader was a man named William Bill Harkins, a notorious figure with a history of violent crimes. He'd managed to evade capture for years, blending in with the very campers and hikers he preyed upon. Authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, but as far as I know, he's still out there somewhere, moving from one remote location to another. I guess the mountains aren't as peaceful as I thought. My name is Soren Janis. I'm 20 years old, and this happened last October in Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I had just landed my first solo freelance assignment, a travel feature for an outdoor magazine. It was my chance to prove to myself, and maybe to a few others, that I could thrive on my own after leaving a toxic relationship. I didn't expect the park's breathtaking beauty to be marred by whispers of the past, or that those whispers would grow louder with each passing night. When I first arrived, the park was everything I'd hoped for. My RV fit snugly into a secluded campsite overlooking the gorge, the roar of the falls constant in the distance. Blackwater Falls was a photographer's dream. Cascading water, mist rising through the gorge, and vibrant autumn foliage painted in fiery reds and oranges. The first day was perfect. I hiked, shot hundreds of photos, and scribbled notes about the trails and wildlife. The peace and quiet were a balm, exactly what I needed after months of turmoil. That evening, I sat by the fire, sipping tea and scrolling through my shots. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the edge of one frame, a figure stood between two trees. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face shadowed. I frowned, zooming in, but the details remained blurred. I didn't remember seeing anyone during my hike, and the figure hadn't appeared in any other photos. I shook it off as an optical illusion, probably a trick of light and shadows, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second day brought strange encounters. I started the morning by stopping at the visitor center, hoping to get some local insight. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, was friendly but seemed to be watching me too closely. She eyed my camera gear and smiled knowingly. "Planning to photograph the falls?" she asked. "That's the idea," I replied. Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering. "Be careful around the falls, especially near dusk. The dead don't like company." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Before I could ask more, she turned to help another guest, leaving me with a vague unease. Later, on a trail to the falls, I ran into Gary, a park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a genial demeanor. As he gave me a quick overview of the park's history, I brought up Maggie's warning. He chuckled. "Oh, that's just local folklore. Back in the Civil War, there was a Confederate soldier who hid out in the gorge. They say he deserted his regiment and was hunted down near the falls. Some folks claim his spirit never left, but I've worked here for years and never seen a thing." I tried to laugh with him, but his words stayed with me. That evening, the first real sign of something unnatural occurred. I set up my tripod near the falls, hoping to capture the golden hour light. As I framed the shot, my breath caught. The air around me had turned frigid, my breath fogging in front of me despite the mild weather. My camera refused to focus, the lens shuddering as if something was blocking it. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard whispers. I spun around, expecting to see other hikers, but I was alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd speaking just out of earshot. The unease became unbearable, and I packed up in a rush, leaving the falls as the last light of day faded. That night, back at the RV, I reviewed the day's photos. Most were stunning. The falls bathed in warm golden light, but in 3 of them, the figure from the previous day appeared again. This time, he was closer, standing at the edge of the water. His face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been. And in the last photo, he was staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut and locked the RV door. The next morning, I debated cutting the trip short, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I'd always prided myself on being rational, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences ruin my assignment. While hiking near the falls, I noticed an overgrown side trail. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. It led to a clearing where the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. In the center of the clearing was a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried there long ago. Nearby, I found an object half buried in the dirt, a weathered leather journal. The pages were brittle but legible, written in a looping, old-fashioned script. The entries told the story of a Confederate soldier who had deserted his regiment and fled into the gorge. His words were filled with fear and desperation. "The nights grow colder, and I hear them coming. I cannot outrun my fate," the last entry read. "They will find me tonight. I will not see another sunrise." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive feeling returned. The RV's lights flickered, and shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the firelight outside. And then I saw him. The soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened with fear as I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows emerged from the trees, darker and more twisted, their forms writhing like smoke. They whispered accusations, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Traitor. Coward. You will not leave." Panicking, I grabbed the journal and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The soldier's expression shifted, sadness, perhaps gratitude, and he gestured toward the disturbed earth I'd seen earlier. I understood. Clutching the journal, I ran back to the clearing. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. My hands shook as I placed the journal on the grave and whispered a quiet prayer for peace. The air around me grew still. The shadows stopped, their forms dissolving into the night. The soldier lingered for a moment longer, his hollow eyes softening before fading into the mist. By morning, the oppressive feeling had lifted. The forest seemed brighter, the air lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Before leaving, I stopped at the visitor center to return the journal. Maggie was there, her knowing smile greeting me. "You helped him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She reached out, patting my hand. "He's free now. You did a good thing." As I drove away from Blackwater Falls, I realized the experience had changed me. I didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt the weight of doubt and fear that had followed me into the park. Sometimes, the past lingers in ways we can't explain, and sometimes all it takes to move forward is to lay it to rest. My name is Caspian Scott, and back in 2014, I was working search and rescue up in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I spent most of my time navigating dense, misty forests and scrambling up rocky hillsides, helping lost hikers who'd wandered too far from the trails, or wrangling bears that got a little too comfortable with human food. I didn't mind the isolation. In fact, that's why I got into the job in the first place. Nothing appealed to me more than a life free from office politics and fluorescent lights. Out here, it was just me, the wild, and whoever I happened to be saving. That summer, we'd had more than the usual number of missing persons cases, particularly in an area known as Deep Gully. The locals stayed away from that part of the park, claiming it was cursed or some such nonsense. Old-timers had plenty of stories about hikers who'd gone in there, never to come back, or who'd stumbled out looking like they'd seen the devil himself. But it wasn't the supernatural nonsense that had me on edge. It was the sheer number of disappearances piling up. I was sent out to Deep Gully to investigate another missing person report. A family of 4 had been camping near the base, and the father, a man named Daniel Whitmore, had gone for a late-night walk and hadn't come back. His wife, visibly shaken, had flagged down a ranger the next morning, her hands trembling and her voice barely above a whisper as she explained how her husband had just vanished into the trees. They had 2 kids with them, about 8 and 12, both sitting wide-eyed and silent as their mother relayed the details. Now, usually when a guy goes missing on a walk, you can chalk it up to getting lost or even falling asleep somewhere. But something about the way she described it The quickness of his disappearance, the total silence that followed, gave me chills. I brushed it off, though. I'd been out there enough times to know how the wilderness could warp reality, especially for people not used to its isolation. I took off around midday with my pack, water, radio, and a machete. We weren't exactly encouraged to carry firearms unless there was an immediate known danger, and I wasn't about to argue with policy over a routine search. The plan was simple: follow the trail where Daniel had gone, sweep the area, and report back. Deep Gully lived up to its name. It was dark even in broad daylight, with thick canopy cover and massive trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The place felt ancient, like it had been hiding secrets long before humans ever stumbled into it. Birds rarely sang in that part of the forest. Instead, there was an oppressive quiet, broken only by the crunch of my boots against the earth. I had a solid 2 hours of nothing, not even a hint of disturbed foliage or broken branches that would signal where Daniel had gone. The deeper I went, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't long before I started seeing strange markings on the trees, deep claw-like gouges running down the bark in patterns that didn't quite look natural. Bears, maybe? But they didn't usually roam this far from the streams, and they wouldn't have left marks this precise. About 3 hours in, I stumbled across something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A scattering of bones, picked clean. They lay in a crude circle, almost ritualistic, arranged with a strange precision that didn't feel random. I knelt to get a better look, noticing that the bones weren't animal. They were too big for that. My gut twisted as I realized they were human, maybe a femur, a couple of ribs, and what looked like part of a jaw. I wasn't an expert, but I'd seen enough to know the difference. Suddenly, the radio crackled, breaking the silence so loudly I almost dropped it. A voice came through, staticky but clear enough. "Caspian, any sign of him yet?" I pressed the button. Found something. Not him, but human remains. Scattered. There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Stay put, Caspian. We're sending backup." But I didn't stay put. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved a little further into the thicket, feeling the eerie quiet sink deeper into my bones. The claw marks on the trees became more frequent, almost overlapping in places, and a foul stench filled the air, a mix of rotting meat and something sharper, like sulfur. It was thick enough to make my eyes water. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by the thick branches above, but then it moved. The creature was hunched low to the ground, with legs that looked almost canine, but were stretched and knotted like the limbs of an emaciated deer. Its skin was taut and grayish, stretched over a skeletal frame that seemed both human and something much, much older. The head was the worst, elongated, almost horse-like, but with too many teeth, visible even when its mouth was closed. It reminded me of some nightmarish cross between a wolf and a man, though it was neither. I froze, barely breathing, watching as it sniffed the air, tilting its head in a way that felt too deliberate, too calculating. I had no idea if it had spotted me, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Slowly, I began to back away, step by step, each move deliberate and soundless. Just as I thought I'd made it far enough, I heard a sharp crack, my boot landing on a dried branch. In a flash, it turned its head, snapping toward me with unnatural speed. I could see its claws digging into the ground, coiling its body like a spring, ready to lunge. My brain screamed to run, but my body was locked in place, caught in the terror of that split-second decision. Then it lunged. I managed to snap out of it just in time, diving behind a fallen tree as the creature crashed into the spot where I'd been standing. I heard it thrashing, claws scraping against wood as it clawed at the tree trunk between us. I knew I couldn't outrun it, and I wasn't about to wrestle it with my bare hands. There was nothing left to do but fight. I grabbed the machete from my belt, hands shaking but holding steady enough. As it tried to scramble over the log, I swung upward, slicing across what looked like its shoulder. It let out a choked, rattling sound, staggering back just a bit. But that only seemed to make it angrier. It reared up, towering over me as I crouched defensively, trying to predict its next move. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of something, a branding mark on its neck, burned into its flesh, some twisted spiral symbol. I didn't recognize it, but it was as if someone, somewhere, had claimed it, like livestock. though who would want to keep something like this around was beyond me. The creature lashed out again, and I barely dodged, feeling its claws graze my arm, leaving a burning sensation in their wake. The pain jolted me into action, and I swung the machete with everything I had, this time catching it under the jaw. The blade dug deep, and for a moment, I thought it was done. But the thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it grabbed the machete, yanking it out of my hands with one powerful swipe, flinging it to the side. Unarmed and backed into a corner, I did the only thing I could think of. I scrambled backward, looking for anything I could use. But the forest offered nothing. Just as it leapt toward me, something unexpected happened. A shot rang out from somewhere behind us, and the creature faltered, a spurt of dark, tar-like blood oozing from its shoulder. My radio crackled again, and I heard my partner's voice shouting, "Caspian, run!" I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, zigzagging through the trees, barely aware of the sounds of pursuit behind me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I pushed forward, adrenaline dulling the pain. Finally, I broke through the dense forest, stumbling back onto the trail where a team of rangers was waiting, guns drawn. The creature didn't follow me out. It stopped just within the tree line, its eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intelligence, as if it understood exactly what it had lost. Then it turned and slinked back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows without a sound. Back at the station, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, but no one could offer any answers. I told my boss about the branding mark, the bones, the strange silence in the gully, but all I got were blank stares and nervous glances. Officially, the incident was chalked up to a bear attack, an excuse we all knew didn't hold up but kept people from asking too many questions. Months later, I heard rumors of a cult operating in the area, one that supposedly worshipped ancient forest spirits or some nonsense like that. The symbol I'd seen on the creature matched a crude drawing in a confiscated notebook found near another ranger station. My name is Ronan Smith, and back in 2018, I took my RV to the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington State. After 14 years of juggling numbers as an accountant, I figured it was time to exchange spreadsheets for pine trees. Maybe I'd find out if bears really do prefer picnic baskets. The open road was a welcome change from the monotony of office life, and as I drove, the skyscrapers faded into towering evergreens, and the air grew crisp and fresh. I wondered if this was what air was supposed to smell like, without the usual hint of exhaust fumes. By late afternoon, I found the perfect spot to set up camp, a secluded clearing near Lake Crescent. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Not bad for a city slicker, I thought, patting myself on the back. I spent the next hour setting up, unfolded my chair, fired up the portable grill, and even attempted to fish off the lake's edge. The fish seemed unimpressed with my bait, probably mocking me from beneath the surface. Fine, I'll stick to canned beans, I laughed to myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled by the campfire, enjoying the serenity. The stars began to peek out, more vivid than I'd ever seen. It was humbling, made me realize how small we are, just tiny specks in a vast universe. Or maybe that was the beans talking. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I secured the RV, double-checking the locks, a habit from living in the city. Climbing into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe I should quit my day job and become a professional camper, I mused before drifting off. A loud thud jolted me awake. Groggy, I glanced at my phone. 1:13 a.m. I listened intently. Another thud, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against metal. Probably just a raccoon, I told myself, though my pulse quickened. Curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing a flashlight, I peered out the window. In the dim glow, I saw a figure near the rear of the RV. Not a raccoon, unless they had started wearing jackets and standing upright. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. The figure froze, then slowly turned toward me. The flashlight beam caught his face, a rugged man with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were dirty and torn. He stared at me for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Evening, friend," he drawled. "Can I help you?" I asked, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Sorry to bother you," he said, taking a few steps closer. "My name's Roy. Truck broke down a mile back. Mind if I use your phone to call for help? Something felt off. Maybe it was the odd hour or the fact that there was no vehicle in sight. I don't have a signal out here, I replied. Closest ranger station is about 10 miles east. He chuckled softly. No signal, huh? Mind if I come in and wait till morning then? I hesitated. I'm sorry, but I'd prefer if you didn't. Nothing personal. His smile faded. That's not very neighborly of you. Look, I can't help you. Please leave, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right then, you have a good night. He turned and walked back into the darkness. I waited until I could no longer hear his footsteps before exhaling. That was weird, I muttered. I decided it was best to move on. I started the engine, ready to find a new spot or maybe head to the ranger station myself. As I shifted into gear, the RV lurched, but didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. Stepping outside to investigate, I found the rear tires slashed. My heart sank. This was no coincidence. A rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. I spun around, flashlight scanning the tree line. Who's there? Silence. Then a low whistle pierced the quiet night. Looking for me? Roy stepped out, holding a hunting knife that glinted ominously. What do you want? I demanded, backing toward the RV door. He shrugged casually. Company. It's a lonely night. I bolted inside and slammed the door, locking it. My mind raced. The tires were ruined and there was no cell signal. I needed a plan. A pounding on the door made me jump. Open up, Ronan, he called out. My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? Then I remembered. The name tag on my backpack visible through the window. Go away, I shouted. He laughed. We could have been friends, but you had to be rude. I searched the RV for anything that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on a flare gun in the emergency kit. Not ideal, but better than nothing. The pounding grew more aggressive. The door hinges creaked under the strain. Last chance, he warned. I took position at the far end of the RV, flare gun aimed at the door. With a final crash, the door gave way, and Roy stepped inside. Leave me alone, I yelled. He took a step forward. Or what? Without hesitation, I fired the flare gun. The bright light shot across the space, striking him in the shoulder. He screamed as his shirt caught fire, stumbling backward out of the RV. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my keys and prayed the engine would cooperate. The RV groaned but moved slowly forward, riding on the rims. I steered onto the main road, the metal screeching against the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I saw Roy extinguishing the flames, his face twisted in rage. He didn't give chase, but his eyes bore into me, a silent promise of vengeance. After a grueling hour, I spotted lights ahead, a small gas station, miraculously open. I pulled in, the attendant staring wide-eyed at the damaged RV. Call the police, I blurted out. There's a maniac out there who attacked me. He hurried inside to make the call. Minutes later, the place was swarming with officers. I recounted everything, from the initial encounter to the attack. A search team was dispatched, and by dawn, they had Roy in custody. Turns out his real name was Martin Blake, a drifter with a long history of violent crimes. He'd been eluding authorities for months. An officer approached me as I sipped stale coffee inside the station. You're lucky, he said. We found evidence at his campsite suggesting he was planning something far worse. I didn't ask for details. Some things are better left unknown. They took my statement and offered medical assistance, but aside from a bruised ego, I was unharmed. The RV, on the other hand, would need some serious repairs. As the sun rose, I thanked the officers and arranged for a tow back to the city. So much for my peaceful getaway. Before leaving, the attendant handed me a fresh cup of coffee. On the house, he said with a sympathetic smile. Rough night? I chuckled. You could say that. Next time I want to get away, maybe I'll just visit a park in broad daylight. He laughed. Can't argue with that. Back in the city, life returned to its usual pace. The office gossip, the clacking of keyboards, the overpriced lattes. It all felt different now. Maybe I wasn't cut out for the wilderness, or maybe I just had exceptionally bad luck. One thing's for sure, I've got a hell of a story for the next office party, and perhaps an excuse to avoid camping invitations for the foreseeable future. They say nature is healing. I think I'll stick to therapy. I've always believed that everything has an explanation. Ghost stories, strange occurrences, they're all just misinterpretations of reality. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV deep into the desert, chasing the Marfa lights, one of those unexplained phenomena that people love to whisper about. I was determined to demystify them, capture them on camera, and show the world that there was nothing supernatural about it. The desert stretched out before me, flat and endless, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. I'd parked my RV on the outskirts of Marfa, Texas, far enough from the town to avoid any distractions. The lights were supposed to appear at night, floating out there in the desert like glowing orbs. People called them spirits or even UFOs, but I knew better. I was here to photograph them, document them, and move on. That first night was quiet, too quiet. I set up my camera gear just outside the RV, tripods locked in place, lenses ready for long exposure shots. The desert was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've been buried under a blanket. No wind, no animals, not even the hum of distant cars. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I'd been alone in the wild before. This was nothing new. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up and call it a night, the lights appeared. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable, small, glowing orbs that hovered just above the horizon. I leaned forward in my chair, eyes fixed on them. They weren't anything special, just some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, I thought. But then they moved slowly, almost deliberately. They floated closer, their soft glow reflecting off the desert sand. I snapped photo after photo, my fingers flying over the camera buttons. This was exactly what I'd come for, clear, undeniable evidence. No one could call this supernatural nonsense once I had the data. But the lights were behaving differently than I expected. They weren't just floating randomly, they were almost watching me. I stood up, staring at the lights as they hovered, flickering softly, maybe 50 yards away. Then suddenly they darted closer. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back instinctively. The lights pulsed, brightening for a moment before retreating, as if they were playing with me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. Just lights, just gases or atmospheric anomalies, nothing to be afraid of. But the way they moved, it was like they were alive. I shook my head, frustrated. "Focus, Greg, it's all explainable," I muttered to myself. I turned back to my camera gear, checking the shots I'd taken. That's when the first problem started. The images were completely corrupted. Every shot I'd taken of the lights was ruined. Nothing but distorted lines and static, like an old TV losing signal. I flipped through the photos in disbelief. The lights had been right there, clear as day, but my camera had failed to capture a single usable image. My stomach churned. That wasn't right. I'd tested all the equipment before I left. I'd checked the camera, adjusted the settings, but the battery was draining fast. Too fast. The indicator flashed red, and within seconds the camera died in my hands. "Damn it," I hissed, grabbing my backup battery, but it was no use. Everything. Camera, spare batteries, even my phone was losing power faster than it should. It was like something was draining the life out of my equipment. Frustrated, I packed up my gear and headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. I tried not to think about the lights still hovering outside, flickering just beyond the window. It had to be a glitch, I told myself. I'd deal with it in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around me. Every so often, I'd glance at the window, expecting to see the lights hovering there. I didn't want to admit it, but something about them unnerved me. The following day, I tried to shake off the unease. I spent hours checking my gear, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, but everything looked fine. The equipment was fully functional again, as if nothing had happened. It was strange, but I wasn't about to let one weird night stop me. I'd try again tonight, capture the lights properly this time. As evening fell, I set up my gear again, determined to make up for last night. The desert was still, the sky a dull orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I watched, waiting for the lights to appear, and they did. But this time they were closer. They floated just above the sand, pulsing softly, glowing brighter than before. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them move. Their rhythm was almost hypnotic, but it wasn't just their movement that startled me. It was the fact that they seemed to be getting nearer. I reached for my camera, ready to capture them again, but the battery was dead. Again. I checked my phone. Dead. Panic flickered at the edge of my mind. This wasn't possible. The lights were now just 30 feet away, their glow casting long shadows on the ground. They pulsed brighter, flickering in strange, almost deliberate patterns. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were trying to communicate. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible, like the wind brushing past my ear. I froze, straining to hear. The whisper came again, but this time it was clearer. "Greg." My blood ran cold. I whipped around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one, just the empty desert. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Greg." I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing. This wasn't right. This wasn't explainable. The lights were hovering just a few feet away now, and the whispers, they were inside my head. I scrambled into the RV, slamming the door shut behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. The lights were outside the window, pulsing, flickering. The whispering continued, filling the small space with eerie, disembodied voices. I tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power, no escape. The lights pressed closer, their glow filling the RV, casting strange shadows on the walls. I felt them, those whispers, crawling into my mind, telling me to come outside, to follow them into the desert. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't going to let this beat me. I wasn't going to give in to fear. But then, the lights began to move. They circled the RV faster and faster, like they were closing in on me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Follow the lights. I felt a tug, a pull in my chest, as if the lights were calling me, drawing me out of the RV. I fought against it, but it was getting harder to resist. The lights flickered faster, the whispers filling my head until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed my jacket and kicked the door open, running into the desert. The lights followed, darting around me, leading me deeper into the night. I stumbled through the sand, my heart pounding. The whispers guided me further from the RV, but something inside me snapped. I stopped running, gasping for air, and turned to face the lights. I wasn't going to follow them. I wasn't going to disappear like so many before me. "No," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I won't go." The lights pulsed, flickering faster. The whispers screamed in my head, but I stood my ground, forcing myself to ignore them. Slowly, the lights began to fade. The whispers grew softer until they were nothing more than faint echoes in the wind. I stumbled back to the RV, exhausted, my mind spinning. The lights were gone, retreating into the desert. But I knew they'd be back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. By morning, I packed up and left Marfa. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the desert, far from the lights. I never told anyone what happened. No one would believe me anyway. But I'll never forget those lights, the way they moved, the way they whispered my name. I came here to prove they were just a natural phenomenon, just an unexplained mystery of the desert. But now I know better. Some things aren't meant to be explained, and some lights should never be followed. I came to Red River Gorge to find peace, or at least that's what I told myself. When you've lost everything, when your life's fallen apart, nature feels like the only refuge. The solitude, the silence, they're supposed to help you clear your mind, right? But if I'd known what waited for me in those woods, I might have stayed home. I parked my old Jeep at the trailhead, strapped on my pack, and set off. The first day was perfect. The crisp autumn air had the faint smell of wet leaves, and the colors, God, the colors were dazzling. I'm a photographer by trade now, trying to make a name for myself since leaving teaching. The leaves, in their fiery oranges and deep reds, made the perfect backdrop for my shots. It was the kind of beauty you could get lost in. I guess that's what I was hoping for. The trail was tough, though, harder than I expected. The steep climbs had my legs burning, and my pack felt heavier with every step. I could feel the camera bouncing against my back, reminding me why I was here. The plan was simple: a week alone in the wilderness, just me, my gear, and enough food to get by. No distractions, no people, no Rachel. I shook the thought out of my head and kept walking, focusing on the landscape instead. The river was nearby, its faint gurgle a common soundtrack to the crunch of leaves underfoot. By the time the sun started to dip, I was more exhausted than I should have been. My muscles ached from the unfamiliar terrain, and blisters had already formed on my heels. I set up camp by the river. I'd brought an old tent that had seen better days, but I figured it would hold up fine for a week. The stove, a clearance sale special, was already giving me trouble. The flame flickered weakly, as if unsure of itself, and I ended up eating half-cooked noodles before giving up and settling into my sleeping bag. That first night, I didn't sleep well. At first, it was just the usual branches rustling, the wind whispering through the leaves, but around midnight, I heard something strange. It sounded like a voice, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees. I sat up, listening. It came again, too soft to make out words, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence like speech. My heart began to pound. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe distant campers, but there had been no cars at the trailhead. I was alone out here. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day was harder. The trail was steep and my legs were sore from the day before. The scenery was still breathtaking, but the deeper I went into the gorge, the more oppressive it felt. The trees grew closer together, their branches blocking out the sun, casting long shadows that made the woods seem darker than they should have been. It was around midday when I first saw it. I was setting up a shot of a rocky outcrop, the kind of thing that might make a good feature for my portfolio, when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It was that primal sensation, the one that tells you you're not alone. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, and there it was, just within the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was a person, someone tall and thin wearing a long tattered coat, but something was off. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease. "You're just seeing things," I muttered to myself. "It's nothing." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, the whispers returned. They were louder this time, clearer. I could almost make out words, but they were garbled, like someone trying to speak underwater. I lay in my tent, wide-eyed and tense, listening. The sound wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to swirl around the camp, circling me. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped open the tent, and shined the beam into the woods. There was nothing, just the trees, the river, the empty night. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, closer. I wanted to call out, but my throat was dry, my mouth frozen. I was too scared to make a sound, as if acknowledging it would make it real. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent fully and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap. My breath came in sharp, visible puffs as I scanned the darkness. Then I saw the footprints. They were large, human-shaped, and fresh, pressed into the damp earth around my tent. They hadn't been there before I went to bed. My heart raced as I knelt down to examine them. They circled my campsite as though someone or something had been watching me, walking around while I slept. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I backed away slowly, stumbling as I scrambled back into the tent and zipped it up as fast as I could. I huddled in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The whispers continued, relentless, until dawn. By the third day, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, and every step felt like agony. My legs were leaden, my pack seemed twice as heavy, and my mind was unraveling. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart into overdrive. I wanted to leave, but I was too far in now. It would take me days to hike back out, and the thought of turning around filled me with a strange sense of dread. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like the gorge itself didn't want me to leave, like it was holding me here, drawing me deeper into its clutches. I kept walking, pushing through the exhaustion, trying to ignore the whispers that still echoed in my head. By midday, I found myself near the river again, at a small clearing. I decided to stop and rest, hoping the sight of the water might calm me. But as I sat there, staring at the rippling current, I saw something across the riverbank. The figure. It was standing on the opposite shore, half hidden by the trees. I could see it more clearly now. Tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long for its body. It wore tattered, grayish rags that fluttered in the breeze, but its face was a blur, a smudge of darkness that seemed to shift and warp as I stared at it. My pulse quickened, and my breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to capture proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I raised the lens, focused on the figure, and snapped the shutter. The moment I did, the figure flickered like static on an old TV. 1 second it was there, and the next, it wasn't. Gone. I lowered the camera, my hands trembling, My gut told me to leave, to get the hell out of here, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. The whispers returned, louder now, almost angry. They filled the air around me, a cacophony of voices speaking over each other, too fast to understand. And then I felt it, a cold, sharp pressure on my shoulder, like fingers pressing into my skin. I screamed, scrambling to my feet and backing away from the riverbank. The coldness followed me, clinging to me like invisible hands, trying to pull me down. I ran blindly, recklessly, away from the water, away from the voices. I didn't stop until I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The whispers had faded, but the cold lingered, sinking deep into my bones. I was shaking, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat by my dying campfire, clutching my camera, my eyes darting nervously around the darkened woods. The whispers had returned, but they were softer now, distant. I knew I wasn't alone. The figure, the wraith, as I'd come to call it, was out there, watching me, waiting for me. I tried to rationalize it, but there was no denying the truth anymore. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light or the wind playing games with my mind. There was something in these woods, something ancient, something angry. On the 5th day, I decided to leave. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking with nervous energy. I didn't care how long it took. I had to get out of this place. But the gorge had other plans. As I made my way back toward the trailhead, the path seemed to shift beneath my feet. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the way out. Every turn brought me back to the same spot, the same trees, the same stretch of river. It was like the forest was folding in on itself, trapping me in a maze of endless woods. And then I saw it again, the wraith. It stood in the distance, half hidden by the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I raised my camera again, my only weapon, and snapped the shutter. The wraith flickered, its form distorting, but it didn't disappear. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate, its tattered clothes trailing behind it like smoke. The whispers grew louder, the air around me colder, thicker. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. The wraith didn't stop. It came closer and closer until it stood just feet away from me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Its face, a swirling mass of darkness, hovered inches from mine. And then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, it spoke, "You can't leave." When I woke up, I was lying on the riverbank, soaked to the bone. The wraith was gone, but the memory of its voice lingered in my mind, an echo that refused to fade. I don't know how I made it back to the trailhead. I don't remember the walk, the drive, or even packing up my gear. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never go back to Red River Gorge. Some places weren't meant to be explored. My name is Beckett Adams. I'm 25, a retired firefighter, and this happened in Seneca Creek backcountry, West Virginia, a year after I lost my wife, Emily. I had planned the trip hoping to find peace, or at least distraction, in nature. What I found was something I can never forget. It started as a simple RV camping trip, my first time alone. Emily and I had always loved the outdoors, and this seemed like a way to reconnect with that part of my life. Seneca Creek, with its waterfalls and isolation, felt like the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. I told myself the solitude would help, that it was what I needed. I wasn't ready for what came next. The drive into the backcountry was uneventful. The gravel road leading to the campsite felt endless, hemmed in by towering trees that cast long shadows even in the midday sun. I stopped at a small gas station near the turnoff, where an older woman named Marlene ran the counter. "You're heading into Seneca Creek?" she asked as I paid for firewood and a few snacks. I nodded. "Yeah, just me and the RV." Marlene gave me a strange look, her hand pausing over the register. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low. "These woods aren't always kind to those traveling alone." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned away to help another customer. Her words lingered in my mind as I drove the final stretch. The campsite by Judy Springs was everything I'd hoped for. Quiet, picturesque, and completely isolated. I parked the RV near the creek, the sound of rushing water a soothing backdrop as I unpacked. That first night, I sat by the fire, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The first sign that something wasn't right came the next evening. The day had been perfect. I hiked to Seneca Falls, taking photos and jotting notes in a journal I'd started since Emily's death. I even smiled a few times, thinking about how much she would have loved the view. But as I headed back to camp, a strange feeling crept over me. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots on the trail. When I reached the RV, the unease deepened. My firewood, neatly stacked by the pit, was scattered across the ground. At first, I thought an animal had gotten into it, but the pieces were arranged strangely, as if they'd been tossed deliberately. I shrugged it off and rebuilt the fire, telling myself I was imagining things. But that night, as I sat by the flames, I saw it for the first time. A shadow moved between the trees. It wasn't the flicker of firelight. This was deliberate, purposeful, like someone pacing at the edge of the forest. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, the sound of my own voice startling me. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. But as I turned back to the fire, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shape, humanoid but wrong, slipped behind a tree, vanishing before I could focus on it. I slept in the RV that night, the doors locked and curtains drawn. The third day brought more unsettling signs. I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the creek to the RV. They were human-like but elongated, the toes too long and splayed. They stopped abruptly a few feet from the door, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. That afternoon, while hiking to an overlook, I stumbled upon something even stranger, symbols carved into the rocks. They weren't like any markings I'd seen before, almost as if they were burned into the stone. The air felt heavier there, as if the forest were holding its breath. I hurried back to camp, but the unease followed me. That night, the shadows returned. This time, they were closer. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The shadowy figure appeared again, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. It didn't move. The fire flickered, the flames shrinking as if smothered by an unseen force. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. By the fourth morning, I'd had enough. I packed up, determined to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. The engine cranked but refused to turn over, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I decided to hike back to the gas station for help. I marked my trail carefully, leaving a breadcrumb of sticks and rocks so I wouldn't get lost. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction I went, the paths looped back to my campsite. I walked for hours, my legs aching, only to find myself standing in front of the RV again. As the sun set, the shadows returned. This time, there were more of them. Figures moved through the trees, surrounding the campsite, their glowing yellow eyes piercing the darkness. I barricaded myself inside the RV, clutching a flare gun I'd brought for emergencies. The shadows circled outside, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the silence. Then the radio came on. Static filled the air, crackling and distorted before a song began to play, a song I hadn't heard since Emily's funeral. It was her favorite, and hearing it now, here, made my blood run cold. Her voice followed, faint and pleading. "Beckett, leave." I stared at the radio, my hands trembling. "Emily?" The voice came again, softer this time. "You have to go." The shadows closed in, their forms pressing against the windows of the RV. I fired the flare through the nearest window, the bright red light igniting the darkness. The figures recoiled, their shapes dissolving like smoke. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the keys and tried the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. I drove through the night, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The forest seemed alive, the trees bending unnaturally as if trying to block my escape. When I finally reached the gas station, Marlene was waiting. She didn't seem surprised to see me, her expression unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Marlene sighed. "It's the Shadow Man. He feeds on people's grief, their fear. He doesn't kill, he traps you, keeps you lost in the dark until there's nothing left." I left West Virginia the next day, vowing never to return. The shadows are gone now, but sometimes, late at night, I hear faint footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if the Shadow Man ever truly let me go. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, You'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions. But there I was, driving deeper into Grand National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore, vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer, damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind. Vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke. A tall tale to scare off amateur hikers, nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again. That unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds, like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices, coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me. Cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it. But the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again. Closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story. It was real, and I wasn't getting out. I bought the trailer last spring secondhand from a guy who was moving to Florida. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. That trailer was supposed to be my sanctuary. After the stress of the divorce and losing my job, I needed a break from everything. The thought of spending a few nights by myself, parked somewhere quiet, far from the chaos of my life, sounded like exactly what I needed. So I headed to a place that had been calling to me ever since I'd heard about it, Lake Lanier. People talked about the lake in hushed tones around the campfire when I was younger. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed that entire towns had been drowned when they flooded the valley to create the lake in the 50s, cemeteries included. The dead, they said, were still down there, restless, under the water. I never paid much attention to the stories. Superstitious nonsense, I thought. But after everything I'd been through lately, the idea of driving to the lake and parking my trailer on a secluded shore was more appealing than ever. A fresh start, even if just for a few days. I found a spot at the edge of a small, isolated cove, far from any of the designated campgrounds or busy boat ramps. Just the quiet lap of water against the shore and the trees standing tall and silent. It was perfect, peaceful, exactly what I was looking for. I parked the trailer and set up camp, watching as the late afternoon sun shimmered on the surface of the lake. That first evening, I cracked open a beer and settled into my lawn chair facing the water. The silence was deep and soothing, almost too quiet. I could barely hear the usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, birds singing, frogs croaking, just the faintest trickle of the water lapping against the shore. At first, it was comforting. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. But then, as dusk fell, the air started to feel heavy, as if something unseen had slipped into the space around me. I ignored it. Just nerves, I thought. I was stressed, burned out, and needed to relax. But even as the sun slipped below the horizon and the lake turned dark and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the first night, I heard the sound, a soft splash like someone wading through the shallows right outside my trailer. It was nearly midnight, and the fire had long since died out. I was tucked inside the trailer, half asleep, when I heard it again, splash, then silence. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Probably a fish, I told myself, or some animal come down for a drink. But it wasn't. The splash came again, and this time it was louder, more deliberate, as if someone was walking through the water slowly. I crept to the window and peeked out, my breath catching in my throat. The moon was bright enough to light the water, and for a second, I swore I saw a shape, something dark, standing in the shallows just a few feet from shore. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, like a person, but the figure was strange. Its head was too low, like it was hunched over, and its limbs looked wrong. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I stood frozen, heart racing, as I stared out at the still water. Nothing, just the calm surface of the lake, as if nothing had been there at all. I didn't sleep much after that, tossing and turning, convinced it was just my imagination. I'd been through a lot lately. It was bound to mess with my head. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. I spent the day fishing. Even though I didn't catch much, I kept telling myself I was just tired, that the isolation was getting to me. But then, when I walked back to the trailer in the late afternoon, I noticed something strange. Footprints, small barefoot prints in the mud, leading from the water's edge up toward my trailer. They were small, like a child's. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself they were my own tracks from earlier, but I hadn't been barefoot, and they didn't look right. They crisscrossed each other, as if someone had wandered back and forth around and around before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down, running my fingers over the prints, a chill creeping up my spine. There was no one else out here, no one but me. I looked up at the lake, at the still, murky water. It seemed darker than before, as if the light couldn't quite reach beneath the surface. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. Maybe an animal had left the prints, or maybe someone else had camped here before I arrived. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, the footsteps returned. I had just turned off the lights and settled into bed when I heard it, the soft, wet squelch of footsteps moving slowly around the trailer. My heart began to race. I grabbed the flashlight and the small hunting knife I had brought with me, inching toward the door. The footsteps stopped just outside. I flicked on the light and threw open the door, shining the beam of the flashlight out into the night. Nothing, just the trees, the water, and the faint rustle of wind. But I knew I'd heard it. I wasn't imagining things. I'd heard footsteps circling the trailer, bare footsteps like someone creeping through the mud. I locked the door and stayed up for hours, listening, but there was nothing else that night, just silence. By the next morning, my nerves were shot. I drove into town to grab supplies and shake off the tension. While waiting at a local diner for my food, I overheard some locals talking about the lake, about the old towns that had been submerged when the dam was built, and about the cemeteries that hadn't been fully relocated before the waters rose. "The dead don't rest easy out there," one of the older men said, his voice low. "You spend too much time by the lake at night, and you'll start hearing them. You'll hear them call your name, luring you down to the water." I felt the cold sweat trickle down my back. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, never had. But the way the man spoke, as if he'd seen something, felt something, unnerved me. I left the diner and drove back to the lake, more on edge than before. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the dread returned. It was stronger now, more insistent, like something in the air had shifted. I sat by the fire, staring at the lake, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The water, dark and still, seemed to be hiding something beneath its surface. And then I heard it, a voice, faint, almost indistinguishable from the breeze, but there, whispering my name. "Rick." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared out at the water, the fire crackling behind me, and the voice came again, soft and distant. Rick. It wasn't just the wind, it was real. I stood up, backing away from the shore, my pulse racing. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the water, my hands trembling. That's when I saw them. Figures, dark, pale shapes just below the surface of the water. They were small, human-shaped, but their faces were twisted and distorted like they were drowning but frozen in place. The water around them rippled slightly as if they were trying to reach for me, but they stayed submerged, watching. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared at the figures, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. I was losing it. I had to be. I turned and bolted back to the trailer, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife I'd grabbed. The footsteps came again that night, louder, more insistent, and the voice kept calling my name. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care how irrational it seemed or how crazy the story would sound when I got back home. I wasn't staying another night by that cursed lake. I packed up the trailer and tried to start the truck. Dead. The battery was completely drained, even though I hadn't left anything running overnight. My hands shook as I tried again, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. It was as if the life had been sucked out of the vehicle. I was trapped. Panic surged through me as I tried to think. I could hike back to town, but it would take hours, and the thought of leaving the trailer and whatever safety it offered seemed like a death sentence. The water called to me, louder now, the whispers coming more frequently. They wanted me in the lake. I grabbed a set of tools from the back of the trailer, hoping to get the engine working again. As I worked, I felt eyes on me. I could sense them. The figures standing just at the water's edge, waiting. The temperature dropped, the air growing thick and cold, as I frantically tried to get the battery to respond. Finally, after what felt like hours, the engine roared to life. I didn't waste a second. I jumped into the truck, threw it into gear, and peeled out of the campsite, the trailer jerking behind me. As I drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. They were there, standing at the edge of the lake, their pale, distorted faces watching me as I sped off into the night. I never went back to Lake Lanier. I haven't told anyone about what I saw or what happened, but even now, months later, when I lie awake at night in my own bed far from the lake, I can still hear it. The faint sound of whispers calling my name. I thought a week alone in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest would be the perfect way to clear my head after everything that had happened. The divorce, leaving the military, and that nagging feeling I'd wasted years of my life. I figured some isolation would help me reset. So I packed up my RV, grabbed my gear, and drove deep into the heart of the forest. I should have known better when I first pulled into the campsite. I felt that familiar sense of calm I used to get on deployment, a kind of satisfaction that comes with being prepared for whatever the wilderness might throw at me. The Apache Sitgreaves is a vast, rugged place, and this far in, you don't see many other campers. That's why I picked it. No people, no distractions, just the forest, my RV, and my thoughts. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV at the edge of a tree line overlooking a deep ravine. The view was incredible, the trees spread out like a sea of green with the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the land. I spent the first day hiking, snapping a few photos of the landscape and trying to relax. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply, but I welcomed the cold. It felt like the world was trying to numb me, erase the pain I'd been carrying since Rachel left. I lit a small fire, sat by it, and let the quiet settle in. That's what I wanted after all. But the silence felt different out here. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The first night passed uneventfully, but something woke me around 3 a.m. I sat bolt upright, listening. There it was again, a sound just outside the RV. It wasn't the usual rustle of wildlife or the distant call of an owl. No, this was different. Slow, deliberate footsteps. At first, I thought maybe another camper had wandered into my area, but when I peered through the window, all I saw was blackness, the dense trees illuminated only by the faint moonlight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. I swept the beam of light across the campsite, scanning the edges of the trees. The footsteps had stopped. Nothing moved. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind only a few glowing embers. No signs of anyone. I convinced myself it was probably just an animal and went back inside, locking the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, the hairs on the back of my neck stayed up, like I wasn't alone. By the second day, I was already starting to feel the isolation. The weather was turning colder than I'd expected, and to make matters worse, the RV's heater was acting up. It kept cutting out, leaving the inside freezing. At night, I spent hours trying to figure out what was wrong, but it was no use. I'd have to tough it out. I hiked out again that afternoon, looking for some distraction. The forest was beautiful, but in an unforgiving way. The trails were rough, and after a while I veered off the main path, looking for more secluded spots to explore. I told myself it was for the photography, but really I just wanted to be somewhere no one could find me. That's when I first saw the carvings. At first I didn't even notice them. They were subtle, old, just faint marks on the trees. I stopped to take a break and caught sight of one right in front of me. A series of lines etched into the bark, almost like a symbol. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves. It wasn't natural. Someone or something had put it there. As I moved on, I found more of them, scattered and in no particular pattern, but close enough to make me uneasy. They circled the area where I'd set up camp, like some kind of boundary. I shook off the strange feeling gnawing at my gut. This forest was old. People had been here long before me, carving symbols and marks for reasons long forgotten. Nothing to worry about. But I didn't stop worrying. That night, I woke up again, the same time as before, 3 a.m. The footsteps were back, closer this time. The sound was unmistakable, soft but deliberate, like someone walking slowly around the RV, testing the ground with each step. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps circled the RV, paused, then resumed. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the flashlight but hesitated. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something else? The footsteps stopped. Dead silence. Then I heard the tapping. Soft, rhythmic taps on the windows. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The taps grew louder, more insistent, coming from all sides of the RV now. I forced myself to get up slowly and crept to the nearest window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back just a little. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness outside. Nothing. Just the forest and the shadows. But when I looked again, I saw it. A handprint pressed against the glass, smudged and distorted, like someone or something had leaned in close. The print was too large to be human. Its fingers were long, unnaturally so, and the palm had an odd, warped shape to it. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but the tapping eventually stopped. The air felt thick, like it was pushing down on me, suffocating me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping my hunting knife, waiting for the footsteps to return. By the third day, I was ready to leave. I packed my gear and decided to head out early. Whatever had been out there the night before, I didn't want to find out. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but nothing. Dead. The frustration boiled over into panic. I was stranded. I grabbed my map and decided I'd have to hike out to the nearest ranger station a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't stay here another night, not with whatever was out there. I set off down the trail, moving fast. The cold had seeped into my bones, but I pushed on, hoping to make it before dark. The forest felt different now, darker, heavier. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow hiding something just out of sight. And the feeling of being watched, it never went away. About halfway to the station, I heard it again, footsteps that weren't my own. I stopped, listening. My hand rested on the knife at my side. Then I heard a voice. It came from behind me, soft and distant. Liam. I froze. My blood ran cold. Liam, help me. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It was Rachel's voice, my ex-wife, but she wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Liam. Her voice again, closer this time. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me. I started walking again, faster this time, my eyes darting around, looking for any sign of movement. The voice followed me, calling my name over and over. I clenched my fists, trying to block it out, trying to focus on the trail. But then I saw it, standing in the middle of the path, not 20 feet ahead. The figure was tall, too tall to be human. Its limbs were long and thin, draped in tattered rags that seemed to shift in the wind. Its face, there was no face. Just a void, a swirling mass of darkness where its features should have been. Its eyes, though, its eyes were glowing, bright yellow, like two embers burning in the night. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I fumbled for my knife, holding it out in front of me, though I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no sense to it. This thing wasn't human. It wasn't natural. The Watcher. Something from old Apache legends, stories I'd heard long ago, was real, and it had found me. The thing took a step forward, and I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. I don't remember much of the run. It was a blur of trees and shadows, the forest closing in on me as I tore through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. The Watcher's eyes burned into my back. Somehow I made it to the ranger station. I don't know how, but when I stumbled into the clearing and saw the small building, I nearly collapsed in relief. I burst through the door, breathless and shaking. The ranger inside looked up, startled, but I couldn't form the words to explain what had happened. I didn't need to. When I finally caught my breath, I told him everything. The footsteps, the handprints, the thing in the forest. He didn't believe me, of course. Why would he? He checked my RV later, saw the scratches and the smudged handprint, but still shrugged it off. Probably just a bear, he said. But I know better. As I sit here now, writing this down, I can still feel it. The Watcher's eyes on me. It's waiting, watching, and it'll follow me no matter where I go. Some things you can't outrun. The darkness of the Teton National Forest stretched before me like an endless abyss. The trees, as ancient as the land itself, rose tall and imposing, blocking any light that might escape from the stars. This was the kind of place I used to love, complete isolation, pure, untouched nature. I was there to study the behavior of some rare owl species and take a few nighttime photographs. At least, that was the plan. At first, everything was as expected. I'd parked my trailer in a remote part of the forest, far from tourist trails and campgrounds. The silence that surrounded the area was reassuring. I was used to this kind of environment and loved the challenge of being completely alone, immersed in nature. But that night, the silence felt different, thick, heavy. I finished setting up camp and prepared for a night of observation. The wind blew gently, and the leaves made that soft, soothing sound that always accompanied the beginning of a night in the forest. For some reason, though, I felt a slight sense of unease, as if something was watching me. I ignored it. I knew solitude could play tricks on the mind. I had always been a skeptic. I wasn't the type to fall for superstitions or local legends. I went into the trailer to adjust my equipment. I wanted to set up the cameras and recorders to capture sounds and images of the animals that, with luck, would appear around me. But the first sign that something was wrong came then. My cameras started malfunctioning. The display kept flickering, and the images came out distorted, as if something was interfering with the sensors. I looked at the cameras, confused. They were charged, working perfectly before I left home. I tried again, but the problem persisted. I thought it might be magnetic interference, some kind of atmospheric anomaly that could happen in more remote areas. I decided to step outside and check my phone's GPS, but to my surprise, it had no signal. Okay, I thought. It's not the end of the world. I'm in a remote area. It might just be a matter of finding a higher spot to get a signal. But as the night went on, things really started to get strange. I was outside adjusting the camera lens when I heard the first sound, a low, guttural noise echoing between the trees. It was hard to tell what it was. Something deep in the forest. It sounded distant, but it was enough to put me on alert. I knew all kinds of wild animal sounds, but this wasn't familiar. I swept the darkness with my flashlight, trying to locate the source of the sound, but all I saw was the faint glow of trees and the light reflecting off the leaves. The wind seemed to have stopped suddenly, leaving the forest completely still. There wasn't even the sound of insects or owls. Absolute silence. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. I knew that sometimes nature could be like this, Predators could silence the environment, scaring off smaller animals, but even by predator standards, that silence was oppressive. I decided to head back to the trailer and wait until morning. Maybe it was just exhaustion talking, and the darkness made everything scarier than it really was. After all, I had spent the whole day exploring the place. I laid down on my bunk trying to relax, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't shake it. Then I heard the sounds again. Footsteps. I knew the sound of animal footsteps well, but these were different. Heavy, long, with a deliberate drag. I got up slowly, my senses on high alert. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the door. Something was moving outside. With my heart racing, I carefully opened the trailer door, and the flashlight illuminated the ground around me. Claw marks. The ground was scratched, as if something large had passed through. I stood still for a moment, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It could have been a bear or a wolf, but the marks were deep, as if made by something strong enough to tear the bark off a tree with a single swipe. A slight pressure began building in my chest. I wasn't easily scared, but what was happening here was strange. Very strange. The next day I drove to the nearest town. I needed fuel for the generator, and I also wanted to ask a local if they had seen any signs of bears or wolves in that part of the forest. I walked into a small grocery store and casually mentioned to the owner, an elderly man, about the marks and the strange silence from the night before. He suddenly grew serious. His dark eyes stared at me, and he said in a grave voice, "That's not a bear, son. That's the shadow of the Black Forest." Confused, I asked what he meant by that, and with a worried expression, he told the story of an ancient entity that wandered the forest on nights with a new moon. They say it feeds on travelers' fear, plays with them until it drags them into the darkness. No one who meets it comes back the same. He spoke of the shadow as something that couldn't be defeated, only avoided. I smiled a little, unnerved, thanked him, and returned to the trailer. Small-town superstitions, I thought. Maybe he just wanted to scare me, or perhaps he was exaggerating local legends. But deep down, something inside me felt uneasy. I decided to stay alert, but still rational. That night, the tension grew. The malfunctions with my equipment continued. The trailer's lights began flickering. The generator kept failing. And then I saw them, shadows moving between the trees. Fast, but impossible to make out clearly. Something was out there. I stood up and walked to the window, flashlight pointed into the darkness. And that's when I saw it for the first time. The shadow. It was a tall, misshapen figure, almost humanoid. But its arms were long and grotesque, and its eyes glowed with a pale yellow light. It stood about 30 yards away, motionless between the trees. I felt my blood turn to ice. It was completely still, watching me. The silence returned, heavier than ever. I froze, unable to move for a few seconds. When I blinked, it was gone. My rational mind began to crumble. This couldn't be real. I must have been tired. My mind was probably creating these things. But at the same time, my body knew something dangerous was out there, something I couldn't explain. The following hours were a blur of frustrated attempts to fix the situation. I tried restarting the trailer, adjusting the systems, but everything failed. The light flickered and went out. The wind, which had been still earlier, began to blow fiercely. But instead of easing the tension, the wind carried whispers, distant voices as if the forest itself were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. The shadow appeared again, this time closer, its eyes watching me from the edge of the flashlight's beam. It was getting closer, slowly, playing with me. Panic rose in my throat. It was surrounding me, feeding off my fear, just as the old man at the store had said. I tried to leave. I started the trailer's engine, but it died almost instantly. I had no choice but to face this thing. I grabbed an improvised torch and stepped outside, my hands trembling. I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to try something. The shadow moved again, floating between the trees. My eyes couldn't focus on it for long, but I knew it was getting closer. It was as if it was wrapping me in its darkness, like draining my sanity bit by bit. Then I remembered the fear. It fed on fear. I needed to control it. I had to force my mind to work. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to calm my breathing. The panic began to fade, slowly but surely. I opened my eyes, and it was there, standing just a few feet away. But something had changed. It stopped. My controlled breathing, my slowing heartbeat seemed to weaken it. The glow in its yellow eyes dimmed. I didn't know how, but it seemed to be working. With one last desperate attempt, I got back into the trailer and started the engine. It sputtered, choked, but then roared back to life. I hit the gas, the sound of the engine drowning out the whispers and the wind. In the rearview mirror, I saw the shadow slowly fading into the darkness. I left the forest that night without looking back. I didn't know what that thing was or how I had escaped, but I knew one thing: I would never return to that forest. The shadow of the Black Forest was real, and I was glad to still be alive to tell the tale. My name is Rufus Palmer, and this happened to me on June 16th, 1994. I was an ordinary guy living an ordinary life. I worked at a car repair shop in the small town of Salem, Illinois. I liked my job, but every now and then I needed a break from the grease and the noise. So I bought myself an old RV and made a habit of taking off for a weekend of camping whenever I could. That summer, I decided to head out to Shawnee National Forest, a sprawling and quiet place, perfect for a bit of solitude. I remember that weekend clearly. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of place where you can forget about the world for a while. I found a secluded spot near a small stream, parked the RV, and settled in. The first day was uneventful, just the way I liked it. I fished a bit, read a book, and enjoyed the quiet. On the second night, things took a turn. It started with a noise, a rustling in the underbrush that got louder and more insistent as the night wore on. I shrugged it off as animals scurrying around. But then, just past midnight, I heard something different, a low, throaty sound, like a deep exhale but more guttural. It was close, too close for comfort. I stepped out of the RV with my flashlight, scanning the dark, dense forest. The beam of light cut through the black, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. I called out, "Who's there?" but got no response, just the echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. The next morning, I found footprints near the stream. They weren't animal tracks, but didn't look human either, too large and misshapen. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I didn't want to let a few odd noises ruin my trip. By the afternoon, my friend Jack showed up. Jack Hudson was a guy I knew from the repair shop. We often hung out on weekends, drinking beer and shooting the breeze. I was glad to see him. It felt good to have some company. We spent the day fishing and talking about life, the kind of stuff you can only share out in the open, away from the hustle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we set up a fire and cooked the fish we caught. Jack was a good cook, always adding a bit of this and that to make it taste just right. We laughed, drank a few beers, and enjoyed the warmth of the fire. It felt like any other camping trip, until we heard the noise again. This time, Jack heard it too. "What the hell is that?" he asked, looking uneasy. "I don't know," I replied. "I heard it last night too. Thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me." We both stood there, listening. The sound was closer now, a strange, heavy breathing mixed with a low rumble. It felt like something was watching us, in night, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I felt a chill, and it wasn't from the night air. "Maybe it's a bear," Jack said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Could be," I said, trying to sound casual, but the unease was growing. We decided to call it a night and headed into the RV, locking the door behind us. Jack, always the practical one, pulled out a hunting knife and placed it on the table. "Just in case," he said with a grin. We lay in our bunks trying to sleep, but the noise outside continued. It was a constant, rhythmic sound, like something large and heavy moving around. Every now and then, it would stop, and there'd be a silence that was almost worse. I didn't sleep much that night, and judging by the way Jack tossed and turned, neither did he. The next morning, we found more tracks around the campsite. They were even more pronounced, deep impressions in the soft earth that suggested something big. Jack examined them closely, shaking his head. "I've never seen tracks like these. Whatever it is, it's not a bear." We decided to stay close to the RV that day, not wanting to venture too far. As the day wore on, an uneasy feeling settled over us. It was like the forest was watching us, waiting. The usual sounds of birds and animals were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. By dusk, the tension was palpable. Jack suggested we leave, but stubborn as I was, I didn't want to cut the trip short. "We'll be fine." I said. We'll keep the fire going all night. Whatever it is, it won't come near the flames. Night fell, and we sat by the fire, trying to keep our spirits up. We talked about old times, the stupid stuff we did as kids, but there was an edge to our laughter. Every now and then, we'd fall silent, listening. The noise started again, louder this time and closer. Jack gripped his knife, and I grabbed a heavy flashlight, more for the weight of it than the light. We stood by the fire, scanning the darkness, and then we saw it. A shape moved just beyond the edge of the firelight, too quick and shadowy to make out, but it was big, bigger than any animal I'd seen out there. It moved with a strange, almost fluid motion, like it was gliding through the trees. "Rufus, we need to get out of here," Jack said, his voice low and urgent. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Let's go." We backed toward the RV, keeping our eyes on the shifting shadows. But as we reached the door, the creature stepped into the light. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, tall and lean, covered in matted fur, with eyes that glowed in the firelight. Its face was twisted, almost human, but not quite. It looked at us, and I felt a cold dread settle in my gut. Jack raised his knife, but before he could do anything, the creature lunged. It moved with incredible speed, knocking Jack to the ground. I watched in horror as it slashed at him, its claws tearing through his clothes and flesh. Jack screamed, a sound that I'll never forget. I tried to move, to help, but my legs were frozen. The creature tore into Jack, and within moments, it was over. Jack lay still, blood pooling around him. The creature looked up at me, its eyes glowing with cold, malevolent intelligence. Somehow, I found the strength to move. I turned and ran into the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking. Outside, I could hear the creature moving around, its claws scraping against the metal. I grabbed Jack's knife from the table and stood there, waiting. The RV shook as the creature pounded on the door. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Desperation clawed at me, and I looked around, trying to find a way out. There was a small window at the back, just big enough for me to squeeze through. I climbed up and pushed it open, the cool night air rushing in. I threw the knife outside and then pulled myself through, dropping to the ground with a thud. I grabbed the knife and ran. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees a blur as I sprinted. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footsteps and that awful breathing getting closer. I stumbled through the dark, my mind racing. I had to find help, had to warn someone. But the forest was vast and empty, and I had no idea where to go. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The night was silent again, the creature nowhere to be seen. I sat there, clutching the knife, waiting for the dawn. When the first light of morning broke through the trees, I got up and started walking, my mind numb, the events of the night a blur. I stumbled through the forest, following the stream until I found a road. A passing car stopped, and the driver, an old man with a kind face, asked if I was all right. I told him what happened, and he drove me to the nearest town. The police didn't believe my story at first, but when they found Jack's body and the tracks around the campsite, they knew something terrible had happened. They searched the forest but found no sign of the creature. They called it a wild animal attack, but I knew better. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. I never went back to Shawnee National Forest. The RV was left there, a rusting reminder of that night. I still think about Jack, about what happened to him. I don't have answers, just a name for the creature that haunts my dreams. I call it Whistler, for the eerie sound it made as it moved through the trees. I moved away from Salem, tried to start fresh somewhere new, but the memories followed me, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk in the quiet places. I tell my story to anyone who will listen, not because I want to scare them, but because I want them to be careful. There are things out there, things we don't understand, and sometimes they come too close. It's May, and I'm headed to Yosemite National Park. It's always been a dream of mine. My wife Anna isn't big on camping, so I'm rolling solo. My name's Stan, by the way. Got myself a sweet little RV, the works, shower, kitchen, the whole deal. Just the way I like it. You know, independent, out in the wild. I've been driving for days, and I finally hit those towering sequoias. It's breathtaking. The crisp mountain air, the scent of pine. It's perfect. I park at one of the upper campgrounds, more isolated than those in the valley. Exactly what I wanted. The real deal, not some tourist trap full of screaming kids. The first day is pure bliss. I hike some lower trails, take it easy, and soak in the majesty of those massive trees. That evening, I cook up a storm on my camp stove, feeling like a modern mountain man. I turn in early and sleep like a rock. The next morning, I'm up with the sun, ready for a challenge, the Upper Yosemite Falls Trail. It's long and steep, but the views are supposed to be incredible. I pack the essentials, water, snacks, hiking gear, and hit the trailhead. I'm one of the first out there. Alone on the trail, it's peaceful. A few hours in, I pass some hikers heading back. They warn me about a bear sighting up ahead. Figures. I clap my hands, make some noise, and keep going. The views don't disappoint. The higher I climb, the more the valley opens up like a massive painting. I snap photos like crazy. I stop for lunch on a rocky outcrop with a view to die for. That's when I see it, a flash of movement up the trail, just past a bend. It's not an animal. Too tall, too deliberate. My heart skips. I hold my breath, straining to see better. There it is again. A man. He's just standing there, watching me. He doesn't move, doesn't speak. Something about him feels off. He's wearing city clothes, tailored pants, a dress shirt. Not something you see on these trails. And the way he stands, so still, gives me goosebumps. I'm not the type to scare easily, but out here alone, your mind starts to play tricks. I call out, "Hey, you lost?" Just to break the tension. No reaction. He doesn't flinch, doesn't make a sound. Suddenly, my lunch isn't appealing anymore. I pack up and head back down the trail, keeping him in my peripheral vision. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, I swear it's him following me. But when I glance back, there's nothing. By the time I reach my campsite, I'm shaken. That night, every creak and rustle outside my RV feels like him, lurking. I barely sleep. The next day, I stick to crowded trails, safer with numbers. But the weirdness escalates. Taking sunset photos, I catch movement in my mirror, a figure darting behind a massive sequoia. I run over, but there's no one there. Maybe I'm imagining things. That night, I hear footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling my RV. My blood runs cold. I grab my flashlight, throw open the door, and shine it into the dark. Nothing. The next morning, I'm done. I pack up and leave. No way I'm spending another night out here. As I drive down the mountain, I debate stopping at a ranger station. How do you even explain this? A figure in the trees, footsteps that vanish? They'd think I'm crazy. Hours later, my phone buzzes. It's Anna. "Hey, you okay? Tried calling, no signal." I grip the wheel. Yeah, had to cut the trip short. Got spooked. Want to talk about it? No, it's nothing. I'll be home soon. But it's not nothing. Weeks pass, but I can't shake it. I install security cameras at home, change my routes to work. Anna notices. She tries to help, but the tension lingers. Then, one day, a package arrives. No return address, just my name. Inside is a single Polaroid. It's my RV parked at my Yosemite campsite. In the background, a blur in the trees. Him. Anna sees it too. We have to go to the police. We do. Explaining it is humiliating, but the officers take a report. It's all they can do. Days later, the news breaks. A missing hiker last seen in Yosemite. The photo they show? A man in a dress shirt and tailored pants, the same figure. The Yosemite stalker, they call him. The media goes wild. The cops put us in protective custody, but I know better. He's too careful, too calculated. If he wanted me dead, I'd be dead. My name is Edgar Benning. I was a search and rescue worker for nearly 15 years, stationed out in the wild near the Smoky Mountains. People who go missing in those parts rarely come back. Not alive, anyway. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff, but none of it comes close to what happened on my last night working in the mountains. It started as a typical assignment. 2 hikers, a man and a woman, reported missing by their families. The couple hadn't returned after a weekend trip. We get calls like this all the time, most of them just folks who wandered off the trail or got injured. No big deal. I wasn't worried. My partner Dale and I loaded up the truck with the usual gear: food, first aid, climbing rope, and radios. The drive to the trailhead was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Dale, always the joker, made a crack about how he hoped the hikers weren't off making love in a cave somewhere. I laughed, though it didn't feel right. "Still got that knife of yours?" Dale asked. I nodded, patting the large hunting knife strapped to my side. "Can't ever be too safe," I said. The sun dipped below the trees as we parked the truck. We radioed in our location and started up the trail. It wasn't long before we found the first sign that something was wrong. About half a mile in, we spotted a torn backpack near the edge of a steep drop-off. The nylon was shredded and the contents were scattered. A map, a flashlight, a crushed water bottle. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just emptiness. "Looks like they might have slipped," I said, peering down the slope. The dense undergrowth made it hard to see far, but I could make out a narrow game trail winding its way down into the valley below. Dale grunted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe, but you don't just leave your pack like that. It's like they ran from something." We climbed down the slope, following the faint trail. The trees thickened as we descended, their branches heavy with moss and tangled vines. An unnatural silence settled over the forest, broken only by the sound of our boots on the ground. Even the birds had gone quiet. I don't know how to describe it, but something about the place felt off, like we didn't belong there. Dale must have felt it too, because he stopped cracking jokes. We walked in silence for another mile or so, searching for any sign of the hikers. And then we found the body. It was the woman, or what was left of her. She was lying on her back, arms stretched out to her sides, her face frozen in a grotesque scream. Her chest had been torn open, ribs snapped like twigs. There was no blood, just a hollow, gaping cavity where her heart should have been. Dale swore under his breath, stepping back. "Jesus, Edgar, what the hell did this?" I knelt beside her, my stomach churning. I'd seen animal attacks before, bears, mountain lions, but this was different. Too clean, too precise, like someone or something had done this on purpose. "We need to radio this in," I said, reaching for my walkie-talkie. But before I could, Dale grabbed my arm, his face pale as a sheet. "Edgar, listen." At first, I didn't hear it, just the wind rustling through the trees. But then, faint and far off, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to any animal. Someone or something was coming. Dale and I exchanged a look, neither of us needing to say a word. We turned off our radios and backed away from the body, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whatever was coming through the trees was big, bigger than any human. Then I saw it. A hulking shape emerged from the undergrowth, standing on two legs but hunched over like a beast. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its arms, longer than they should have been, hung low, almost dragging on the ground. But what got me were its teeth. Rows of jagged, sharp teeth, like those of a predator, glistening in the fading light. It sniffed the air, its head jerking toward the woman's body, and then with a speed that didn't match its size, it moved to her side, crouching over her. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place. The creature bent down and began to eat, tearing into the woman's flesh with those horrible teeth. It was methodical, almost careful, like it knew exactly what it wanted. I could feel Dale shaking beside me, but neither of us dared to move. It must have sensed us. Maybe it smelled us, because suddenly it lifted its head and looked right at us. I'll never forget that moment. It didn't have eyes like ours. No, it had something else. They weren't eyes I could understand, but they saw me. Understood me. For a second, I thought it was going to charge, but then it turned, disappearing back into the trees as quickly as it had come. We stood there, frozen for what felt like hours. Finally, Dale broke the silence. We need to get out of here." I nodded, but something in me wouldn't let me leave without checking for the other hiker. If the woman was dead, the man had to be close by. Maybe he was alive? Maybe. We followed the creature's trail deeper into the woods, our footsteps unnaturally loud in the stillness, and then we found him. He was hanging from a tree, strung up by his wrists, his legs dangling like some sick puppet. His chest had been ripped open, just like the woman's, and beneath him, at the base of the tree, were bones. Human bones, old, weathered, picked clean, dozens of them. Dale retched, turning away. "We need to go, Edgar. Now." But I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from the bodies, the bones, the way the man's face was twisted in agony. And then I saw it. The thing. It had been watching us from the trees the whole time. It wasn't alone. I don't remember how we made it back to the truck. Everything after that is a blur of panic, of running, of knowing that if we stopped, we'd be next. We didn't talk on the drive back to the station. There wasn't anything to say. When we got back, I filed my report. I told them about the hikers, the bodies, the creature. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. No one ever does. But here's the thing. I left the bodies where they lay. When the cleanup crew went out the next morning, they found the remains. Both hikers, exactly as I described. Bones still hanging from that tree. They didn't find the creature, though. Whatever it was, it had gone back into the woods. Maybe it's still out there. Maybe it's not. But one thing's for sure. I'm done with the mountains. There's something up there. Something old and hungry, and I'm not sticking around to find out what it wants next. Dale quit the day after. I haven't heard from him since. I don't blame him. Some things you just don't come back from. As for me, I've got a new job now, far away from the woods. My name is Ethan Blackhorse, and I've spent most of my life in places people avoid. It's not that I'm a loner. I was raised on Navajo land, where the vast empty desert stretches endlessly, and the mountains whisper secrets no town could ever understand. Now, I work as a park ranger in the Pozos Wilderness of northern New Mexico, a remote pocket of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. People think my job is straightforward, guiding lost hikers, maintaining trails. But in places like this, you learn quickly that nature holds its own rules. And sometimes those rules don't include us. The elders always warned about these woods, passing down stories of creatures better left undisturbed. I'd heard them all. The Anaya, they called them. Beings born of human sin, twisted and ancient, as much a part of the earth as the trees themselves. But I was practical. I figured stories were just that, stories. I should have known better. That morning began like any other. The mist clung low to the forest, and the air was damp with the scent of pine. A call had come in the night before. A missing hiker, Travis from Albuquerque. According to his girlfriend, he'd wandered off the trail trying to shortcut back to their campsite. Typical. I set out early, the ground slick beneath my boots. 2 hours into the search, I found his backpack, or what was left of it. The straps were shredded, torn apart as if by immense force. No claw marks, no tracks, just a bag ruined in a way that didn't sit right. I radioed the station, my voice crackling through the patchy signal. Found his pack, still searching. I pushed on deeper into the woods, but something felt off. The forest was silent, not just quiet, dead, no birds, no insects, not even the creak of branches. It was as if the entire world held its breath. And then the smell hit me. Metallic, acrid, blood. I found Travis half a mile further, or what was left of him. His body was torn apart with a precision that turned my stomach. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't an animal at all. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. Whatever had done this wasn't just hunting. It was exact. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to run. The elders' stories about the Anaya clawed at the edge of my mind. Beings of earth and darkness, born of human misdeeds, their bodies twisted like ancient trees. Cautionary tales, I'd thought. But standing there, staring at Travis's remains, I wasn't so sure. I turned to leave, but the forest had other plans. The trees seemed closer now, their branches arching together as if forming a cage. Every step I took felt like it led me deeper into a labyrinth of roots and shadows. Then I saw it. At first, it seemed like just another tree, a hulking silhouette against the mist. But then it moved. It stepped forward, towering and monstrous, its bark-like skin rippling as though alive. Its limbs were impossibly long, twisted like gnarled branches, and its head was wrong. Too small for its massive body, it resembled a misshapen wolf's skull, but empty. Its face was a hollow void, dark and endless, and somehow worse than if it had been filled with eyes. It didn't make a sound as it stared at me. It didn't need to. I drew my hunting knife, knowing it was useless, but needing something, anything, between me and that thing. It lunged. The ground shook as it charged, impossibly fast for its size. I barely dodged, feeling the air whip past as its twisted claws raked through the space where I'd stood. It wasn't just fast, it was deliberate, like it was toying with me. I ran. The forest blurred around me as I weaved between trees, but it was always there, crashing through the underbrush, its movements unnervingly silent despite its size. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, roots tripping me, branches clawing at my arms. Finally, I reached the cliffs. Gravel skidded under my boots as I skidded to a stop at the edge, the drop below jagged and deadly. The creature slowed, tilting its head as if mocking my desperation. It charged. At the last second, I dove to the side. Its momentum carried it forward, and with a deafening crash, it tumbled over the edge. The sound of its body smashing through the branches below was like the forest itself crying out. I scrambled down, heart pounding, half expecting it to rise again. When I reached the bottom, I saw it sprawled across the rocks, broken and still. Its bark-like skin was cracked, oozing a thick, dark substance that reeked of decay. But even then, I didn't move closer. Something about it felt wrong, like even in death, it wasn't truly gone. The search party found me hours later. I led them to Travis and the thing that had killed him. They didn't question my story, not when it was lying there in front of them, a grotesque amalgamation of tree and beast. I left the job a week later. I couldn't stay. Sometimes, though, I still hear the elders' words. The Anaya are born of us, our sins given form. They come when we take too much, when the earth decides it's time to take something back. Not all stories are just stories. Some are warnings. I wish I'd listened. I woke to the RV jerking violently, as though we had slammed into a pothole, except we were parked. That didn't make sense. Maybe it was just some twisted nightmare? I hated those. I was deep in the Sequoia National Forest, California, off the grid for the past 4 days. Time warps when the only faces you see are trees, and honestly, that's the way I liked it. I needed the isolation. Life in the city was a rat race, and sometimes I just needed to escape. My name's Theo, by the way. I stretched, yawning, sunlight filtering through the blinds, but something was off. The whole RV seemed tilted, like it was leaning, though I knew I had parked it level. Maybe I hadn't noticed last night. I'd been exhausted. Whatever. I'd deal with it later. My stomach growled, reminding me it was time for breakfast. Pancakes sounded good. As I stood, I heard something rustling by the door. A squirrel? A chipmunk after my stash? It happened all the time. I grinned, walking toward the window. All right, you little bandits, come get your... But I stopped dead. There was something out there, something big. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. There were no grizzly bears around here, not in this part of the forest. The thing was massive, its back hunched, nearly brushing the side of the RV. Its hands, if you could even call them that, were huge, too big for its body, clawed like a badger's with long, sharp fingers. 4 claws on each hand. I could barely see its face, but what I did see made my blood run cold. Its head was wrong, almost no neck at all, just a thick, muscular mass where its shoulders met its skull. Its eyes, black, beady, sunken deep into its face, glistened with a kind of twisted hunger. The whole thing twitched, like it was ready to pounce. My heart thundered in my chest. What the hell is that thing? I backed away from the window, breathing hard, terrified it could hear me. Think, Theo. Stay calm. Stay calm. I grabbed my father's old rifle from under the bed, checking the ammo. Full chamber. This was real. Too real. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, but whatever that thing was, it was on my turf now. I eased my way to the door, trying to steady my trembling hands. I counted to 3 and yanked the door open. Get the hell out of here! I raised the rifle, pointing it directly at the creature. It didn't even flinch. It just straightened up, a looming giant that easily surpassed the doorframe, at least 7 feet tall. It made a gurgling noise deep in its throat, like something was wrong with its very insides, a noise that sliced into my spine and froze my blood. I fired a warning shot into the air. The thing took a lumbering step back, then another. Still hunched but distancing itself, moving slowly as if it were savoring every moment. I kept the rifle trained on it, my fingers white around the trigger, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. It disappeared into the trees. I stood there, frozen, my heart beating so loud I thought it might burst. My breath was ragged. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, but there was no denying it. That thing, it wasn't natural. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the birds and the wind, but my pulse pounded in my ears. Finally, my legs gave out and I slowly lowered the rifle. Get it together, Theo. I glanced at the place where the creature had vanished, but something was wrong. I shut the door, my hand brushing the panel, and it felt dented. No way. I rushed outside, heart hammering. I circled the RV, my breath catching in my throat. There they were. Deep, jagged gashes in the metal, huge claw marks. The thing could have torn through my RV like tissue paper if it wanted to, but it hadn't. Why? There was no time to think. I had to go. I jumped back in the RV, starting it up. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I tore out of there, down the dirt road, not looking back. Hours passed before the road finally met the highway, but the shaking never stopped. What the hell had just happened? I pulled into the first gas station I came across, desperate for answers. The place was run down, flickering lights, dusty shelves. The only person inside was a kid behind the counter, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. "Hey," I said, my voice strained, "can you point me toward the nearest town?" He looked up, eyes dull, and mumbled, "Town? You're kidding, right? Nearest one's a half hour away." I frowned. "What about any back roads? Fire trails?" He shrugged without looking up. "All lead back into the park." My frustration boiled over. "Listen, there's something out there. Something dangerous. He cut me off with a laugh. "Dude, I don't even know what county I'm in. Take the highway. It's your best bet." I didn't have time for this. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A missing persons poster pinned to the corkboard behind the counter. It was faded, the face almost unrecognizable, but it was familiar. The poster read, "Last seen in Sequoia National Forest. Missing for 2 weeks." My stomach dropped. I glanced back at the kid, still scrolling on his phone. He didn't even notice. He didn't care. But I cared. And that cold, gnawing fear told me that there were more of those things out here. I didn't warn him. I couldn't. He'd just write me off as a lunatic. I walked out, climbed back into the RV, and left. I didn't even glance back at the station. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. I drove for hours more, adrenaline wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep chill. Finally, I found a small campground and parked, keeping my RV at the edge, right by the exit, just in case. As dusk set in, the shadows grew longer and my nerves frayed. Every rustle in the trees made me jump. I gripped my rifle, prepared for anything. And then I saw it. A dark shape, moving in the distance. My heart leapt into my throat, but as it came closer, I froze. It wasn't the creature. It was just a bear. A big one, sure, but nothing like the thing I'd seen in the forest. I exhaled shakily, trying to calm myself. What the hell was wrong with me? I needed sleep. The next morning, I went to the nearest town. I hit the library, looking up missing persons reports from the area. The sheer number was chilling. And then I found him, Jacob, missing a month ago. No trace. I dug deeper into local legends and old stories. It was there, buried in the online forums, a hiker's account from years ago. A creature described exactly like the thing I had seen, and it had a name. The Nalusa Faya, a dark spirit, a shapeshifter, a trickster. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I read. That thing could have killed me. It showed me what it could do. Those claw marks on the RV, the dents in the metal. It was toying with me. It wanted me to know it was in control. I left the library sick to my stomach, but there was no denying it anymore. That thing was real, and it wasn't done with me. Weeks passed. The warnings got pulled down. Life tried to return to normal, but I couldn't. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about Jacob, about all the others who had disappeared. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, a hunter, a survivalist, someone who might understand this new, terrifying world I found myself in. I sold everything, quit my job, upgraded the RV, and now I was on a new mission, to find that thing, to end it, for Jacob, for the others, and maybe, just maybe, for myself. The night was suffocating, a thick, oppressive heat that clung to my skin like a second layer. I woke drenched in sweat, the AC in my RV giving up on me hours ago. It was late summer, sure, but I didn't expect the Black Hills to feel like this stifling, relentless heat in the dead of night. I groaned, flipping my pillow to the cool side, trying to find a way to escape the discomfort. But the sweat kept coming, and sleep was impossible. Alone in the middle of the forest, I cursed myself for not sticking to motels with reliable air conditioning. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped into my hiking boots, grumbling under my breath as I stood. No point in staying inside. Maybe the night air would help cool me off, and maybe, just maybe, I could figure out a way to get the AC working. The moment I stepped outside, I knew it was the right call. The air was cooler here, pine-scented and sharp like a cleansing breath for my lungs. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin itch. I decided to make a loop around the campsite. At the very least, I could check the RV's vents, see if any breeze was pushing through from the night. The flashlight beam cut through the trees, lighting up my campsite. 3 days here, and I knew every rock, every tree, every inch of this place. A couple from Rapid City had been here yesterday talking about the trails in good condition, tempting me to explore more of the forest. But tonight was about fixing the AC and getting some sleep. I reached the edge of the campsite, my flashlight illuminating the RV in the distance. I peered through the windows, just darkness, the silence pressing in. I turned, about to head back when something flickered at the edge of the trees. It was brief, like the rustle of a critter, maybe a raccoon. But then I saw the eyes. Black, reflective, not raccoon-sized. I paused, shining the light toward the movement. The eyes stayed locked on me for a moment. No, not a raccoon. This was too big. "Hey there, fella," I called out, my voice a bit too loud, too sharp in the stillness. The rustling stopped. I stood frozen, light trembling in my hand. The feeling in my gut twisted into something darker, more primal. I flicked the flashlight toward the spot where I saw the movement. Nothing. Just the quiet sway of the trees. I should have just walked back to the RV. It was probably nothing. But then I heard it, soft at first, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Slow, deliberate, my heart slammed into my ribs. Something was moving toward me, and it wasn't a raccoon. "Is anybody there?" I croaked, my voice shaky, betraying the unease settling like stone in my chest. The shuffling stopped, only to begin again, louder this time, closer. Panic fluttered in my chest, my breath shallow. "Leave me alone," I said, stepping backward, trying to sound firm. My mind raced, fighting the primal urge to run. The growl was low, deep. It vibrated through the air like a tremor. A warning, and then a shuddering snarl that ripped through the night. I froze. This wasn't a sound of any animal I'd ever heard. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my feet stumbling against roots and rocks as I turned to run. Behind me, the growl escalated, and I saw it. A flash of gray fur, an unnatural speed, and then yellow eyes. Eyes burning with malice, glowing like smoldering coals. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted, adrenaline surging through my veins, my hands fumbling for the RV keys. My flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling into the dirt, forgotten. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat as I fumbled with the door lock, hearing the crushing sound of something heavy, something hungry, behind me. The RV shuddered with a thud. Something slammed into the side of it. I threw open the door and threw myself inside, locking it behind me, my body trembling, my breath shallow. And then came the claws, the sickening scrape of them against metal. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I could only hear it, growling, scratching, demanding entry. I turned the ignition key, my hands slick with sweat, my fingers numb. The engine roared to life, and I threw the RV into reverse. But before I could even breathe a sigh of relief, the roof gave an agonizing groan, and a horrific, inhuman sound erupted above me. Claws, ripping through the roof like it was tissue paper. I looked up, my stomach twisting, and there it was, a mass of fur, sinew, and a snout bristling with long, razor-sharp teeth. But that wasn't what made my blood freeze. It was the hands. Human hands. Fleshy, gray, with long, filthy fingers. It hissed, a grotesque sound, and lunged, its body writhing through the jagged hole. I slammed my foot on the gas, the RV jerking forward, but it was too late. The creature twisted in midair, its claws sinking into the dash, its mouth gaping open like a hellish cavern. I could taste its rotten breath on the back of my neck. I could smell it. Sour, decaying meat, fetid and thick. I swerved. Hard. Metal screamed as it tore against metal, and I saw its face again, closer this time, its patchy fur, its eyes filled with something ancient and evil. I slammed on the brakes, the RV skidding, the world flipping. Everything went black. When I woke, my legs were pinned under the dashboard, the world upside down. Glass crunched beneath me. The creature was still out there. I heard its drag, a low, scraping noise getting closer, and then the pounding. Heavy, hard thumps. Not from the creature. Someone was out there. A figure emerged from the shadows, faint light cutting through the trees. A woman shouting something I couldn't quite make out. "I'm up here," I croaked, weak, hoarse. The creature hissed, its attention shifting. In that moment, I moved, dragging myself free from the wreckage, glass cutting into my legs, the pain barely registering. I reached for the door. She was getting closer, yelling. I opened my mouth to warn her, tell her to run, but before I could, a shot rang out. Then another. The sound echoed through the forest. The creature screamed, something dark and horrible retreating into the woods. The woman wasn't alone. Another figure, a man, was there too, and they pulled me from the wreckage. A couple of shots, a lighter tossed onto the floor, and flames erupted inside the RV, forcing the creature to retreat. Skinwalkers, the woman, Jess, said. We hunt them. My family, for generations. Her words didn't make sense, but after what I'd seen, I didn't question her. Weeks later, I was home, battered, bruised, with scars I'd never forget. No one believed me. Hell, I almost stopped believing it myself. But Jess gave me a talisman, something her grandmother swore by, a symbol of protection. I still have it, tucked under my shirt. And sometimes when the night air grows heavy and the last light fades, I swear I can hear that low, guttural growl out there in the trees, waiting. I call up my buddy, Eerie. That guy's obsessed with camping, almost as much as I am. He says he'll take a couple of days off and we'll head out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long, peaceful weekend. He's got a knack for finding these perfect spots, and being a total gearhead, I know we'll have all the comforts of home while we're out there. Both of us work crazy hours in the city, so this trip is more than just a getaway. It's a desperate need for some peace. The RV's packed, everything's ready. The drive's smooth, no traffic, just open road. The further we get, the quieter it becomes. We're leaving behind the buzz of civilization, but as the forest thickens, I can't help but feel that eerie weight settling over me. These trees, huge, overwhelming, majestic even, in their towering silence. The deeper we go, the more we're swallowed by the shadow of the wilderness. We find a secluded spot by the Clackamas River. It's perfect, just what we need. A small clearing, the river flowing steady, birds chirping, wildflowers poking through the underbrush. It's paradise, as close to heaven as we're gonna get. Uri's got this new tent that practically sets itself up. We get a fire going, crack a couple of beers, and settle in. The kind of night that feels timeless. The stars are so bright, it feels like you could reach out and touch them. Rory starts talking about his job, going on about accounting, but the more he speaks, the more his voice fades. It's like the quiet of the forest is swallowing him whole. I honestly couldn't care less about his desk job. I start to drift off, the tranquility creeping over me. And then, like a slap in the face, the smell hits. Rotting meat, wet fur. It claws at my senses. I look at Ree. He's sniffing the air too, his face going ghostly pale. What the hell is that? I whisper. I don't know, he breathes, his voice barely audible. He stares into the thick dark of the trees across the river, his gaze fixed, wide-eyed. It's like something's staring back. And then it happens. Two glowing amber eyes pierce through the blackness. Massive, spaced far apart. They're not animal eyes. These things are alien, otherworldly. My heart freezes. I feel it deep in my bones. Whatever those eyes belong to is huge. 7 feet tall, easy. For a moment, those eyes just hang there in the darkness, like they're watching us, studying us. I don't even realize I'm standing up, my body moving of its own accord, as if every instinct is screaming to get the hell out of there. Ree swears softly beside me, and I know he feels it too. We're thinking the same thing. Time to go. Just as suddenly as they appeared, the eyes vanish back into the night. The smell starts to dissipate too. We're frozen in place, staring at the spot where those eyes just were. We don't speak. We back up slowly, not looking away from the darkness. The sound of our feet crunching against the dry ground feels deafening. The RV's close now, but I can't shake the feeling that something's still watching us, lurking just beyond the trees. I can't get us inside fast enough. I slam the RV into reverse and floor it, bouncing back up the rough track to the main road. My rearview mirror shows nothing but the black, endless forest. Still, I don't stop pressing on the gas until I see the highway. We don't say a word until we hit a rest stop hours later, our nerves still raw. So what the hell was that? I finally ask, voice shaking. Bigfoot? Uri says, but there's no conviction in his words. Maybe it was too big to be a bear. I think back to the eyes, how they glowed, how wide apart they were. Bigfoot lore is full of smells like that, sure. But the eyes, they were wrong. And what about the way they vanished? Something's not right. Yeah, but Bigfoot's eyes aren't like that. Yeah, I say. And if it was Bigfoot, why did it just disappear? Uri's silent for a long moment. He flicks his lighter open and shut, his face drawn tight. Think we should report it? He asks. I snort. Who's gonna believe us? Hey, we saw a giant glowing-eyed beast in the woods. We'll sound like total lunatics. He nods reluctantly, but we both know this thing isn't over. We're both rattled. I don't want to talk. I don't want to think about it. I just want to drive to put miles between us and whatever the hell that thing was. The next day, I'm back in the city, but it's hard to shake the feeling that something's still out there, lurking, waiting. I'm restless. My hands shake as I pour a drink, trying to calm myself down. Every sound, every creak sends me into a panic. The smell of rot still hangs in my nose, lingering like it's trapped in my skin. I turn on the TV. No reports about Mount Hood, no missing hikers, but then I see it. A report about 2 young park rangers, last seen patrolling the Clackamas River. I freeze. They're missing. My stomach churns. The sense of dread crashes over me. I grab my laptop, search for anything about Mount Hood. There it is. A report on the rangers. Their abandoned vehicle found near a trailhead. No bodies recovered yet. A cold wave of guilt washes over me. I should call the cops, tell them what we saw. But what do I say? Hey, we saw a monster and it might have killed 2 rangers. They'll think I'm insane. And worse, if that thing is still out there, more people could get hurt. I call Ree. His voice is shaky when he answers. You see the news? I ask. The rangers? I saw it. He sounds like he's trying to keep it together. Could be a coincidence. Or it could be the thing we saw, I press. We need to go back. A long pause. Then, all right, I'll pick you up. We're going back. I hesitate. Going back? It feels like the dumbest idea I've ever had, but something in me knows if we don't do something, that thing will keep hunting, and it'll keep getting closer. Ruri shows up armed to the teeth, rifles, knives, camo. He sees the look on my face and shrugs. Might sound crazy, but I'd rather be crazy and prepared than crazy and dead. I can't argue with that logic. We head back to the forest, and the road feels wrong. The daylight isn't enough to wash away the terror that clung to those trees the night before. The drive feels like we're moving through a nightmare, the trees standing like silent sentinels watching us as we pass. We get to the clearing. It's not the peaceful haven it was yesterday. Now it feels desolate, empty, as though something evil has been here. That smell, the same stench of rot and decay. We find a scrap of fabric. It's dark blue, ranger uniform. I freeze. You thinking what I'm thinking? Ree asks, already moving in the direction it came from. I nod, unable to speak. The air feels thick, like it's pressing in on me. We push forward and my chest tightens with each step. The clearing comes into view, and something's wrong. So wrong. A fresh patch of overturned earth. A cold dread fills my throat, and I whisper, no, please. Ree grabs my arm and pulls me back. Whatever did this, it might still be around. Then a snap. A twig breaking in the distance, the sound of something massive moving in the trees. Ruri raises his rifle. My heart pounds in my chest, and I know, whatever it is, it's too late to run. It steps into view, bigger than I remember. Its fur is matted, its body impossibly tall and hunched. And those eyes, those glowing amber eyes, are locked on us, burning with malice. It snarls, revealing dripping black fangs. It's a monster, a nightmare. What is that thing? Ruri breathes, horrified. Without thinking, the word spills out of me. The Ragath. Ree stares at me, confused. The what? My grandpa used to tell me stories, I mutter. The Ragath, a forest demon drawn to fear. It feeds on it. The Ragath roars, a sound so chilling I can feel it deep in my bones. It lunges. We act on pure instinct. Rai shoots. The creature stumbles back but doesn't stop. I grab a flare from my pack and light it. I throw it at the beast and it hisses, recoiling from the flame. The smell of burning fur makes me gag. Run! I shout at Rui. We don't need any more encouragement. We bolt into the trees, ignoring the branches slashing at our faces. We're running for our lives. We reach the RV, and somehow, we make it inside. I fumble for the keys. Start the engine. It sputters. My heart leaps into my throat. Then, the roar. The Ragath is behind us, stalking closer, claws scraping against the ground. I slam my foot on the gas. The RV jerks forward, bouncing wildly. I risk a glance in the rearview mirror. The creature is almost on us, but just as we're about to be caught, the RV roars to life. We speed down the track, bumping along for what feels like an eternity, the Ragath's roars fading behind us. Finally, we hit the highway, miles from the forest. We don't speak. Ruri's pale. His hands shake. That thing, he whispers. I thought it was just a story, I say, voice barely above a whisper. At the first diner we find, we sit in a booth. our bodies wrecked with exhaustion. We call the authorities, spinning a tale, nothing about the glowing eyes, nothing about the Ragath. Just that something big chased us out of the woods. The cops tell us to stay clear of Mount Hood for now. Something's out there. They put out a notice about a potential danger, but nobody knows the truth. No one will ever believe us. I still can't shake the image of that creature, its glowing eyes burning into me. I lie in bed that night, tossing and turning, haunted by the stench of decay. I pull up my laptop searching. I find it, a woodcut, faded and old, buried in some forgotten corner of the web, a picture of a creature called the Ragath, and the description is spot on. The forest demon, driven by hunger, drawn to the scent of fear. I close the laptop. The world will never know the truth, but I will, and that truth is more terrifying than any of them could imagine. A few years ago, I got it into my head to do the whole Alaska highway road trip thing, but not the way most folks do it. No fancy camper van, Instagram filters, or overpriced lattes for me. I wanted the real deal, a beat-up Tacoma truck, a tent, and as much of the wilderness as I could stomach. The name's Cade, by the way. Ex-Army, figured I could handle solitude. Alaska's got solitude in spades, something about its haunting though, a darkness that sits heavy in the air. I thought I was prepared. I'm not the superstitious type, but after a couple of weeks on the road, that feeling started creeping in, like something or someone was always watching me. Not just watching though, watching in a way that wasn't right. It was like the land itself was keeping an eye on me, waiting for something. I was cruising down this empty stretch of road near the Rangel St. Elias National Park, the mountains looming in the distance like angry giants. The sun was low, casting those long, twisted shadows that play tricks on your mind, making you second-guess what you saw. That's when I first spotted it. At first, I thought it was just some fool standing too close to the road, maybe another hitchhiker. But you don't pick up hitchhikers out here, not on these back roads. Not in places where the wilderness swallows you whole if you blink too long. But there was something about this one, something wrong. It didn't move, just stood there, unnaturally still, its head tilted at an angle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't human. Not by a long shot. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body stretched and gaunt like skin pulled too tight over bone. Its clothes, what little was left of them, hung off it in tatters. And its face. God, that face. There were no eyes, just two deep black voids where eyes should have been, like empty sockets. But the mouth, that grin. It was pulled too wide, too thin, like a starved animal's grin. A grin that knew something I didn't. I slammed on the gas, tires screaming as I sped away, not daring to look back. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I didn't stop until the rearview mirror was empty, my pulse only starting to slow once I was far enough away. I pulled over to the side of the road, trying to shake it off. Told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I'd been out in the wilderness too long. I needed a drink. I'd passed out from exhaustion, but I woke up near dawn, the truck shaking violently beneath me. I froze. There wasn't a breath of wind, no storm. Just the truck shaking. Something was out there. I slowly peeked through the window, and there it was. That thing, crouched right next to my truck, its long, spindly fingers scraping against the metal. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, screeching through my bones. I grabbed my rifle, hoping I could scare it off, but the moment I pointed it at it, the thing lifted its head. Those empty, hollow sockets turned toward me, and then it shrieked. A shriek. A horrible, shrill sound that cut through me like ice. I thought I was going to pass out from the sheer terror of it. Then, in the blink of an eye, it scurried off into the trees. Fast, too fast, like a damn spider. I didn't wait around. The next morning, I drove straight to the nearest ranger station, half expecting to find someone who'd think I was just some guy losing his grip on reality. But the man behind the desk, Tom, he was called, just nodded slowly when I told him what I'd seen. "You seen the Nanak," he said, his voice low, gravelly. He didn't need to explain. I could feel it in the air. The Nanak. He said it was an old legend around here, a shape-shifting creature, a predator of the lost and lonely. It feeds on fear, but it's not just some campfire tale. Tom's voice dropped to a whisper. If you see it, you leave, and you don't look back. I didn't believe him. Not at first, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I hit the road again, this time not stopping until I crossed the Canadian border. I thought it was over. But 2 nights later, in a motel room somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I tried to convince myself it was just shadows and bad dreams. Then, the scratching started. Faint at first, like fingernails running down the glass. I just knew. I could feel the weight of it, the presence outside my window. I didn't dare pull back the curtain. Instead, I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't even think about what might be out there anymore. I just ran. I drove until my truck died on some desolate road in Montana. The sun was setting again, those long, creeping shadows stretching out across the pavement like dark fingers. I was stranded, alone with no cell service, but I managed to reach Jared, a buddy of mine. He was a couple hours out with a tow rig and a bottle of whiskey. He showed up just as the light was fading. He cracked open the whiskey and handed me a swig, clapping me on the back. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man," he laughed. But as we hooked up the tow, he went quiet. I saw him pointing at my truck door. "What the hell did that?" he asked, voice low. I didn't answer him. Couldn't. There were 3 long gouges in the metal, deep enough to make the paint curl back, like claws had raked across it. I knew what it was. It had followed me. We didn't talk much after that. Jared didn't tease. Every time the wind rustled through the trees or headlights flickered on the horizon, I'd jump. He'd hand me the bottle again, let me stare into the dark. Neither of us said a word. We both knew. It was out there somewhere, waiting. I can still feel the chill in my bones when I think about that trip. It was supposed to be simple, just a classic end-of-summer RV journey up through the Pacific Northwest. A last hurrah before reality set back in. I had the whole thing planned out. Campgrounds, hiking trails, the kind of diners that served greasy breakfasts with a side of small-town charm. Heck, Corby even brought his fancy camera, all eager to capture artsy nature shots for his photography class or whatever it was. We were excited, full of the usual carefree energy that comes with the end of summer. But something was wrong from the start. I couldn't place it, but it was there. Driving north out of Portland into Washington, we passed this tiny town. I can't even remember the name, faded on the road sign, but it wasn't the sign that stuck with me. It was the town itself. It was empty. Not abandoned, but like everyone had just disappeared. The streets were ghostly still. No cars, no movement, the shops all shuttered, doors wide open with belongings spilling out onto the sidewalk, frozen in time. We tried to joke it off, but no one laughed. It was too unsettling. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Our first night camping was at Grand-Teton National Forest. Beautiful, isolated, perfect for getting away from everything. But there was something wrong in the air. The night felt heavier than it should have. I'd say it was just animals, wildlife, right? But these noises weren't the usual rustling of small creatures. There were heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our camp. I thought it was just Corby being his usual idiot, but then even he fell silent, staring into the dark. I told him to shut up, trying to listen. The footsteps were getting closer. The next morning, we found the footprints. They were huge, almost human, but not. Too large, the toes misshapen, like they didn't belong to anything that walked this earth. We packed up and left immediately, heading for a different spot. We found a small lake that afternoon with a perfect view of Mount Adams. The sun was out, the air crisp, and for a moment, it felt like we could forget what had happened the night before. We were skipping rocks, trying to drown out the unease. But that's when I saw it. Across the lake, on the far side, in the woods. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then it moved. My blood froze. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and hunched. Its skin was grayish-brown, stretched tight across its bones, and its arms were unnervingly long, almost touching its knees. Its head was grotesque, with a massive forehead and a flat, expressionless face, and its eyes, black, pure black. Corby was the first to yell, but by then I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The thing just stared at us, and for a second, I thought we were done for. Then, like a shadow, it melted back into the woods. We didn't stick around. We ran. We didn't stop until we were back in the RV, doors locked, engine roaring to life. We didn't speak until we were miles down the road. But that feeling, that presence, it never left. We all knew it was still out there. Corby stopped taking photos after that, and the jokes, especially the Bigfoot jokes, stopped altogether. No one laughed, not even Corby. We didn't tell anyone what happened, not for a long time. People would think we were crazy, or worse, lying. But now, every time I think about it, especially at night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I hear those footsteps again. It's almost comforting in a way to think it's just my imagination. But then a few months ago, we were digging through some old boxes and Corby found a folder of photos he'd never shown us. Blurry, out of focus, like he'd snapped them in a hurry. But one of them, God, I'll never forget it, shows the silhouette of that thing standing just behind the trees by the lake. Watching. Corby changed after that trip. He's quieter now, distant, like there's a weight pressing down on him. Sometimes he disappears for days without a word, and when I ask where he's been, he just shrugs and says he needed space. Last week, I saw him pack up his car, camping gear, all of it, and drive off, heading north. I don't think he's coming back. I wanted to stop him. Something inside me screamed to stop him. But I didn't. Maybe I thought he was trying to find answers, or maybe he wanted to prove it was real. What we saw, what we felt. Maybe he thought if he got clearer pictures, people would believe us. But I think, deep down, I knew that if he found whatever it was again, it wouldn't let him go. As for me, I don't know. I didn't know much before that trip, but I've learned enough since. I've got my dad's old hunting rifle loaded and waiting. I don't plan on going back up into those woods looking for whatever it is that still hunts them. But sitting here on my porch, with the forest stretching out behind my house, dark and endless, I hear the footsteps sometimes. And this time, I'm ready. Better to be prepared, just in case. My name is Dalton Crowley, and everything changed on June 18th, 1998. I was 28 years old, working as a ranger in the Bitterroot National Forest deep in the heart of Montana. Growing up in Missoula, I'd spent countless days with my father, hiking, fishing, and just escaping into these woods. The silence, the solitude, it was a place of peace. After bouncing between dead-end jobs, I took a step towards something meaningful. Becoming a ranger felt right, like I was reconnecting with a land that had always offered me a sense of tranquility. I was stationed in a small, isolated cabin, far from the nearest road, perfect for someone like me. Just me and the trees, no distractions. Most days it was a peaceful life, with nothing more than a lost hiker or a stray animal report to attend to. The rest of the time I sat on the porch, the crackling of the radio my only company, savoring the eerie calm. But this day, something felt wrong. It started like any other, just routine patrols, checking for damage on the trails or fallen trees. But the heat was unbearable for June. The sun beat down relentlessly, and by noon I felt like I was baking in an oven. I stopped at a stream to cool off, splashing water on my face, trying to shake off the strange tension that was creeping through the air. The woods, usually alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, were unnervingly silent. The air was still, oppressive, as though the very forest was holding its breath. Shaking off the unease, I climbed back onto my ATV, intent on finishing my rounds. That's when the radio crackled to life. It was Dawn, one of the other rangers, her voice strained. "Dalton, you copy?" "Yeah, I'm here. What's up?" "We've got a missing person report. A couple of hikers said their friend disappeared near the Western Ridge last night. You're closest. Can you check it out?" I sighed, rolling my eyes. Lost hikers were a dime a dozen, and tracking them down could take hours. But this felt different. Acting weird. That's what Dawn said about the missing man. That could mean dehydration, panic, or something worse. "Sure thing. Got a description?" "Yeah, late 30s male, about 6 feet tall, brown hair, name's Davy, forgot the last name. They said he was acting strange before he went missing." I gritted my teeth, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Whatever had happened to him, I was about to find out. The Western Ridge was about an hour's ride. The heat hung thick in the air as I made my way through the trees, scanning the ground for any sign of tracks. Halfway there, I noticed something strange. A piece of red fabric snagged on a low-hanging branch. My heart skipped. I killed the engine and got off the ATV, stepping closer. The fabric was torn, as though someone had ripped it away in a hurry. I checked the ground, searching for footprints. Nothing. The forest floor was thick with moss and pine needles, silent, undisturbed. I pulled the fabric from the branch and stuffed it into my pocket. Something didn't sit right. I had the creeping sense that I wasn't alone out here, that something was watching. "Dawn, I found something," I radioed. "A piece of fabric. Looks like it's from a jacket. No tracks yet." "Keep looking, Dalton," came her response, the static making her voice sound distant, uneasy. I continued on foot, deeper into the forest. The shadows grew long as the sun dipped lower, and the stillness pressed in, suffocating. The usual sounds, the whisper of wind through the trees, the call of birds, were gone. It was wrong. It felt wrong. A deep primal unease settled in my chest, and then I smelled it. A rancid stench, like rotting meat mixed with sour sweat. My stomach churned, and I instinctively covered my nose. I pushed through the underbrush, praying it was just some dead animal. But when I broke into a small clearing, I froze. There, propped against a tree, was Davy, or what was left of him. His clothes matched the description, but his face was swollen, disfigured. Bruises and cuts marred his skin. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly into nothing. His mouth was twisted into a grotesque, unnatural grin, and his arms were bent at impossible angles. It was as though every bone in his body had been snapped, rearranged. I took a step back, heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a bear attack. Someone or something had done this. I reached for my radio to call it in, but stopped when I heard it. A soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Scanning the trees, there was nothing. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, eyes watching me from the shadows. "Dawn, I found him," I whispered into the radio, my voice barely audible. "He's dead, and it's bad. Really bad." "What do you mean bad?" Dawn's voice crackled back, laced with panic. "What happened?" "Someone tore him apart. Something did," I said, my eyes darting around. "I think there's someone out here. I don't know who or what, but I need to get out of here. Now. Get back to the cabin. Now. Now, Dalton, I'm calling for backup." I didn't need to be told twice. I backed away from Davy's mangled body, my eyes never leaving the trees. Whatever, or whoever had done this, was still out there. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart leap in my chest. The walk back to the ATV felt like an eternity. The forest, once peaceful, had turned against me, pressing in like a living thing, suffocating, hunting. When I finally reached the ATV, I gunned the engine and tore the trail, desperate to put miles between myself and whatever was out there. But the silence in the forest was crushing. Every glance over my shoulder filled me with dread, half expecting to see something chasing me through the trees. I made it back to the cabin just as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the world in shadows. My heart was still pounding and I could barely catch my breath. I waited for what felt like hours, my mind racing, the radio silent. The signal was always spotty out here, but tonight it felt ominous. Then, just after midnight, I heard it. A soft scratching, like claws dragging across wood. I froze. It grew louder, more insistent, as though whatever it was knew I was inside, waiting. I grabbed the hunting knife from the counter and edged toward the door, my hands slick with sweat. I flicked on the porch light. The weak glow illuminated the ground in front of me, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing just outside the light's reach. It was hunched over, its limbs grotesquely elongated, its skin stretched tight across its bones as if it were nothing more than a walking corpse. Its eyes, black, hollow, endless, locked onto mine, and for a moment I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear, but eventually the thing turned, its movement silent and fluid like a shadow, and vanished into the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, the knife in my hand, heart pounding, waiting for it to return. But it never did. The next morning, Dawn and a search team arrived. They found Davy's body just where I said it would be, but there was no sign of the thing I had seen. They chalked it up to a mountain lion or a bear, but I knew better. What I had seen wasn't of this world. The official report closed with no further investigation, but the locals, they had a name for it. A name whispered around campfires late at night when the firelight flickered too low. They called it Gress.